on Thursday, the 28th of May, from the Walton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. The time is 9:30 a.m. My name is Councillor Martin Todd, Chairperson of the Cabinet and Leader of the Council. This meeting is live streamed from the Council's YouTube channel, and the recording will also be available after the meeting. Subtitles can be switched on, and advice on how to turn these on is set out online. Can everyone ensure mobile phones are on silent, and can I remind members to use their microphones? In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. Turning to the agenda, the first item is apologies for absence, and I have apologies from Councillor Reach and Councillor Thompson. The second item is disclosures of interest, and I need to declare that I have a disclosable pecuniary interest in respect of items 10, 11, 12 on the agenda due to my additional role as a Hampshire County Councillor. However, as there is no material conflict of interest regarding these items, I have a dispensation granted by the Audit and Governance Committee that enables me to speak and vote on these matters. Are there any other declarations of interest? Councillor Porter.
Thank you, and I need to declare that I have a disposable pecuniary interest in respect of the same items as you on the agenda due to my additional role as a Hampshire County Councillor. As there's no material conflict of interest regarding these items, I have a dispensation granted by the Audit and Governance Committee that enables me to speak and vote on these matters.
Thank you very much indeed. Any other declarations of interest? No. We have requests from councillors to speak. Councillor Lee, Councillor Wallace is here as Chair of Scrutiny, Councillor Godfrey and Councillor Horrell, and I will call you forward on each agenda item in line with your requests. The next item is public participation, and we have nobody here to for that. I noticed that I'm expected to announce the cabinet roles. Okay, I thought I'd done that already, but anyway. I don't think I need to.
Yes.
Okay, so I announced. So as announced to council, and the responsibilities remain unchanged in 26-27 as they were before the election. The next item is minutes of the previous meetings held on the 12th and the 18th of March. Can I ask Cabinet if the minutes are agreed as a correct record?
Agreed.
Leader and Cabinet member announcements. Do we have any announcements? We have a fairly full agenda, so I think we may want to just crack on and do that. Okay. So moving on then to the first substantive item on the agenda, which is future of the former leisure centre site. Councillor Becker, would you like to introduce the paper?
Absolutely. So this report brings forward the next stage in determining the future of the former River Park Leisure Centre site. Members, we recall that in July 25, Cabinet approved the restart of the process and the marketing of the site. Since then, significant progress has been made. We've completed the expressions of interest process. We've undertaken extensive public engagement, which is not complete. That process continues, and invited and received formal bids. Those bids are currently being evaluated against robust and transparent criteria, as agreed by this Cabinet. Crucially, this process has been shaped by strong community interest. Hundreds of residents have taken part in engagement, events and surveys, consistently highlighting priorities such as protecting the green space, maintaining existing facilities like the skate park and the indoor bowls, and securing a development that delivers meaningful community and recreational benefit. The purpose of today's report is not to decide the final use of the site, but to enable us to move forward lawfully and transparently. Specifically, we're seeking approval to publish the statutory notice required under Section 123 of the Local Government Act 1972. This is a necessary step in any proposed disposal and ensures that the public has a formal opportunity to make representations before a final decision is taken. As everyone is aware, the site is constrained in important ways, including planning policy, flood risk, heritage considerations and historic covenants. But all bids received do align with a recreational focus, consistent both with the local plan and the site's long-standing purpose, which is why we're seeking approval to publish this notice today. Bringing the site back into active use, when I say the site, not the building, but the site itself into active use is essential. It will remove ongoing costs, reduce risk associated with the vacant building, and provides an opportunity to secure investment and long-term benefits for our community. Following the statutory notice period, a further report will come back to Cabinet, including a full evaluation of bids and any public representations before a final decision is made. So I commend the recommendations to Cabinet.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Becker. I have two councillors who wish to make comments on this paper. Councillor Lee and Councillor Godfrey. Councillor Lee, would you like to come forward?
Thank you, Leader. Good morning, Cabinet, and congratulations on your reappointment. Look forward to a productive new municipal civic year. The former leisure centre. At last, this neglected and costly site is moving towards a decision for reuse. Excellent news. The former leisure centre has become an eyesore with ongoing cost to council and no productive public purpose. There's considerable public interest in its future, so the commitment to continued community engagement is important and welcomed. A partner-led scheme delivering genuine community benefit cannot come soon enough. And I would remind Cabinet that interest in the site extends well beyond the immediate urban area. It is reassuring that the surrounding green space, skate park, play area, tennis courts and indoor bowling green remains protected and outside the scope of redevelopment. I also welcome the stated ambition for an exemplar sustainable development, Paris 7, delivering environmental, social and economic benefits. However, exemplar must mean more than simply meeting baseline planning requirements around biodiversity net gain, embodied carbon, waste minimisation.
We will address those in the debate. Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you. Always welcome the opportunity to remind you that we do have a climate crisis. While I welcome the cool air in this room, it only adds to the 160,000 kilowatt hours, which was taken from the grid in the last 12 months by this building. I would ask you not to use electrical coolers in this way. On this paper, I'm grateful for the update on progress to finally taking action to use this valuable city centre site after such a long period of predictably fruitless activity, or more correctly, inactivity. It is 6 years since the River Park Leisure Centre ceased operation, and nothing has been done to clear the site, to make the site properly safe and secure, or to bring forward any realistic proposal for its future use. Unfortunately, this paper does not clarify the future use of this site any more than has been known from the consultations during the last year. The absence of details of options, along with a proposal to giving notice to dispose of the land under Section 123A(2)(a) of the Local Government Act 1972, suggests that more is known about the likely outcome of the current tendering process. As the report states, Section 123 allows the council to dispose of land for less than best consideration by up to £2 million of value, if it considers disposal will be for the economic, social or environmental benefit of the area. 4 years ago, when this administration tried to pass this land to the University of Southampton, the market value of this whole site was considered to be between £7 and £10 million. If a scheme that brought significant economic, social or environmental benefit, along with a minimum purchase price of, say, £5 million, given previous publicly discussed valuations, it would seem to justify a modest reduction in the best consideration for a public asset. My one question about this paper is, why is local government reorganisation seen as a risk to the scheme? Does the Cabinet consider the disposal of a former leisure centre site to be a reasonable use of public money? So why the rush to make the decision in advance of submitted bids being assessed or a preferred bidder being selected? If local government reorganisation goes ahead, any decision made after September 2026 by this council to sell off the land will have to be ratified by central government commissioners or by the new unitary shadow authority. Does the Cabinet think that other public servants would think that this disposal is not in the interests of the local area? After nearly 6 years showing little interest in moving development of this site forward, does the Cabinet now think that anyone else looking seriously at this proposal will reject it? If the sale of a former leisure centre site is so clearly a good thing for Winchester, why is a decision being rushed through now that will avoid proper external scrutiny of that decision? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Godfrey. Surprised to hear the request to hand over decision making in Winchester to a Labour Secretary of State. But anyway, from the Conservative Party, Councillor Becker, do you have thoughts on the points raised?
I do. As the leaders pointed out, a lot of those questions do relate to the final disposal decision, not the decision before us today, which is simply a procedural decision whether or not to publish the statutory notice. This isn't a decision on the bids. It is not a decision relating to the criteria, which were the subject of a previous Cabinet paper. This decision today is about the publication of the statutory notice with the intention to dispose of land for a recreational purpose. Councillor Lee asked what mitigation to prevent judicial review if it is privatisation of public land. That is why we're seeking the approval today. I think Mr. John can provide a bit more detail once I've concluded about the steps we've taken to try and reduce that risk as far as possible. We can't ever reduce the risk of a JR to nothing, because there is always the risk of a challenge, no matter how unlikely that challenge is to succeed. And we have taken advice both in respect of this paper, as I understand it, and in respect of previous decisions on the site about what is considered to be recreational use. So I think we are very clear about meeting that definition in respect of this process. Councillor Godfrey, yes, I do take exception to the fact that you say that nothing's been done to remove the building or to make it secure, as we have made it very clear through the expressions of interest process. Some of those expressions of interest did seek the retention of the building, so it would have been premature of us to take that building down and therefore remove that those options from the table at that early stage. A lot of work has been done to make that building secure. That work is ongoing. It is an ongoing issue that we do have groups like Urban Explorers who continually seek access to that building in order to explore, but also to damage and cause harm to themselves and to our facilities. And that is an ongoing challenge that we are managing at the moment. Councillor Todd also touched on this. Why is the reorganisation seen as a risk? Why is there this rush to take the decision? Because we want the decision to be taken locally by local representatives who understand, know the area, know the site, and not put it in the hands of Whitehall, frankly. We want the decision to be taken by this council, having listened to the residents that we know so well about the sites that we understand and the sites that we know so well, rather than having that taken, as Councillor Todd says, by the Secretary of State in London. But we want the best outcome for Winchester and for the district of Winchester and the residents of Winchester, rather than the residents of Mid Hampshire.
Thank you. There was a question about the definition of recreation. Is that something we can get a bit of clarity on? And there was also the question about judicial review. This is the monitoring officer, Mr. Jean.
Yes, thank you. Just to confirm, the council has taken legal advice at every step of this process, going back to the previous proposed use. In terms of recreation, the definition is public open space, and the conclusion is that this land falls within that definition. And as a result, we need to comply with section 123(2)(a) and advertise it as such. The legal advice that we've had has confirmed that the best process for dealing with this is to deal with it as a two-stage process. Hence the reason for the decision now just to go out and consult on a proposed recreational use of the site. Thank you.
And is there a definition of recreation? That was a point that Councillor Lee referenced.
Not in the legislation. I mean, we're talking about public open space disposal rather than, I mean, the legislation doesn't mention recreational use. It mentions public open space, which is the reason why we need to publish this statutory notice.
Right, but we're taking a decision. The purpose for it is for recreation. We are putting that effectively. We're putting that constraint on ourselves through this process, even if
Yes.
the legislation doesn't require us to.
Yes.
Which I think provides useful guidance to the public. Are there any questions from other cabinet members? Councillor Porter.
The disposal is including a long lease. Is it a public statement about how long that lease is?
That's a decision for August. Any other questions? Any debate? Councillor Crimoyson.
Yes, I'm a little bit surprised that Councillor Godfrey is suggesting we should take a decision today that might actually delay progress on this. I think everyone in this room, including Councillor Godfrey and all of us, because you actually acknowledged it in your comments, that there is a public demand to see that this site is brought back into productive use and value to the community as soon as possible. And I think the paper has very clearly laid out that there is a very narrow scope to this proposal, which is to issue a statutory notice, which we will have to do at some point. If we were to not do this now, we would have to do it later. And if we do it later, that has potential consequences that would potentially derail the decision at that point. It might end up being that this council can't make that decision at that point because it would then move over to the Secretary of State. So I want to commend the officers for looking into this and coming forward and saying, well, we could issue this statutory notice at this point. We deal with an administrative process and get it out of the way, and that lowers the risk later. It doesn't totally guarantee everything, but it lowers the risk, and that is a good thing. If we have attractive bids that in August, when it's scheduled, we'll look at the final decisions. If we have good bids, then we are in a better place than if we don't make this decision. So not surprisingly, I'm going to support this decision. I think it's lowering the risk that this council can actually make that decision at that point in time and move ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Any further comments or debate? Any last thoughts, Councillor Becker?
Just to reassure everyone as well, because I know there is such a keen interest in the future of the site, that this proposal, the decision we're taking today will again allow comments to be provided by the public, and that the public will get the opportunity, and members of the council, of course, and members of the cabinet will get an opportunity to comment on the bids that have been received as well before that final decision is taken. Just to completely reiterate that the decision we're taking today is not the decision to dispose of the site, and is certainly not the decision on any one of the bids that has come in. It is a procedural point, and the public will continue to have a say on those bids in the summer.
That's great, and that's very reassuring. So this is I think it's a fairly straightforward decision. It's an example of the kind of bureaucracy that central government loves to throw at local government, but we're taking it in a way that actually does provide some reassurance versus the consultation we had at an earlier stage. We're saying explicitly that it will relate to recreation. It's not housing, it's not a church, it's not a school, it's not social care, it's recreation. And that is entirely consistent with what we've heard from the public and during the consultation so far. I think the point of trying to make a decision quickly ahead of LGR is a good one. Our experience of LGR is that the government has never once hit a timing, even though they require us to hit timings. And we do not know what criteria might be put in place. So, for example, we might find that we were forced to take the highest bid, no matter what the social value, no matter what the environmental impact. For example, that could be a type of decision that the government might make. They might say that if we were picking something that was maybe favoured by the public, that maybe was better for the environment, that maybe better met the input and the criteria that we'd set, that was not justification for any financial consequence that might have. Now, I don't want to prejudge the decision we make in August, but it feels to me that that decision belongs locally rather than being sent off to London to be taken by a Labour Secretary of State, a party, let's not forget, that has no representation anywhere in Winchester at county or district level. So I think we would say does not automatically have the depth of understanding of local views that locally elected representatives would have. So the paper that we have in front of us has 3 recommendations: to approve the publication of the required notice under section 123 of the Local Government Act 1972, delegates authority to the strategic director in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Health and Communities to finalise and publish the statutory notice, and agrees that a further report will be brought back following the expiry of the notice period to consider the representations received and consider the disposal of the site to a preferred bidder. Cabinet, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Excellent, thank you very much indeed. The next item on the agenda is about additional expenditure for repairs to the Buttercross. There are certain things, so I will be introducing this paper. There are certain things that any administration of any party or of no party has had to do for the last few hundred years. One is to make sure that we keep a mayor and city status. And since Cardinal Beaufort built it in the early 15th century to care for the Buttercross, or the Market Cross as it was referred to, it's had some major adventures along the way. In 1770, the pavement commissioners for the city sold it. And in traditional manner, the Winchester residents organised a massive demonstration to prevent it being moved, and as a result, it is still here. George Gilbert Scott, who was an astonishingly prolific Victorian architect, reworked it quite heavily in 1865 using Ketton stone rather than the Caen stone of the original. And at the time, we didn't think of doing this. They even had a City Cross Restoration Building Committee, with not a committee that we've set up, and maybe we should have done, to manage the works. The next major piece of work was over 100 years later, which was, as the report highlights, to fairly mixed results in 1991. And now it's our turn. We thought at the beginning of the process that we had, following very detailed studies, that we had a project to clean it, to repair the bits that had fallen off, put on a protective coating and pigeon-proof it. That's what we thought the project was. Suffice it to say, once the scaffolding went up, and it's special scaffolding that doesn't actually touch the Buttercross anywhere, and the photographs in the report are worth a look, but they can't really do justice to the fact that what we discovered when we went to have a look at it is, shall we just say, it wobbles slightly more than you would really want it to. There was a moment when I put on a hard hat and a high vis, went to have a look at the Buttercross, and shall we just say, there are parts of it that are not as stable as we would want them to be. or to use the language of the paper, there are serious structural defects. Some of which are just from the fact that it's very, very old, and some of which relate to choices made in restoration in the 1990s and since then. And that has to be fixed, and that is what this paper lays out. The paper makes, I think, a very clear case that we have to crack on with stabilisation and conservation. The most prudent way of doing this is to continue with our current contractor. The case for action is unanswerable, and I know it's what the people of Winchester would expect for us. We don't want a repeat of the 1770 demonstration. This is the paper in front of us effectively is about our generation's contribution to the Buttercross. It's at the heart of our city, the heart of our community, and it's our job to send it on its way for another 100 years. Because we want to get it right this time. That's very clearly the expectation we've set for our contractors. And I suppose our hope is, in all of this, aside from having a Buttercross that doesn't fall on anybody's head and is cleaned and looks more attractive, is that when our successors write a report on the state of the cross in 100 years' time, or maybe even set up a City Cross Restoration Building Committee to consider it, they will look back on this generation and say that we got it right. So that's the paper we have in front of us. We have two councillors who wish to speak on it, Councillor Lee and Councillor Horrell. Councillor Lee, would you like to come forward and make your comments?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. As you eloquently said, of course, preserving this medieval Buttercross monument as part of our rich heritage in our capital city is supported, I'm sure, by all of us. However, there are several issues of concern on which I'd welcome Cabinet's views. Firstly, a very substantial 500% increase in project cost, around £300,000, raises questions about the adequacy of early inspections, asset management processes, and cost certainties. Why were these defects not identified earlier through routine inspections and surveys? So what confidence does the Cabinet now have that the £300,000 will be sufficient and then further funding will not be required in the very near future? And what contingency is included within this additional funding allocation? Has a quantity surveyor or an external conservation cost consultant independently validated the revised cost estimates? The report proposes delegated authority to revise arrangements with one company without retendering. Is that correct? While emergency circumstances may justify the approach, it still creates program and value for money risks, I would suggest. So without market testing, can we be satisfied that the rates remain competitive and the council is not becoming overly dependent on one specialist? The emergency works notice appears to significantly constrain council's discretion. Can Cabinet clarify precisely what Historic England really legally requires, what work are considered essential for safety and compliance, and whether there are elements of desirable conservation enhancements rather than strictly necessary? There are also reputational and public realm impacts. The Buttercross is located, as we know, one of the highest footfall areas, and prolonged scaffolding and disruption may affect businesses, tourism, and accessibility. The report only briefly references engagements with the bid and local businesses, provides little detail. What has been the impact so far, and what disruption is anticipated during the extended program? The paper also references potential uninsured liability if works are not undertaken, but does not provide detail. So has this been fully considered and the risks identified with respect to that? Finally, whilst I appreciate this is a specific project decision, it also raises, I suggest, the wider strategic question, because this seems to be a reactive maintenance providing significantly more expensive than proactive stewardship. So is there, or should there be, regular, ongoing maintenance reviews of our heritage assets to avoid costly future maintenance liabilities? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And Councillor.
Good morning, and thank you for allowing me to address Cabinet. Excuse me. The Buttercross is indeed an important district asset, and I'm delighted that the repairs were scheduled. It's excellent that we've made progress on this project. And I was also reassured that detailed studies were undertaken prior to the work commencing to ensure that we understood what we were about to tackle. However, that's clearly not proved the case. And whilst I'm not disagreeing with the investment in the monument, and I'm sure if I were you, I'd be doing exactly the same, but the key question for me is about project process. How could this estimate be so inaccurate once the scaffolding had been erected and further work was discovered to be needed? The outrageously large 500% increase in funds is indeed significant. And again, I reiterate, I'm not sure that we would be doing anything differently. But I do think as a council, we need to ensure ourselves that when projects like this are assessed, that we are actually having accurate information in advance about the potential for the project and the potential risks. I don't see that identified anywhere, and please advise me if I've missed something in the papers. So without a doubt, we should be investing for the future in this monument. But I do think there are some answers that we as councillors and the public need to understand about this monument, and indeed others that may need repairing in the future, so that we can plan efficiently and be as resourceful as possible with our monies, certainly as we go forward in these uncertain times. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. And both you and Councillor Lee rightly highlighted this question of the 500% increase. So first of all, a bit of background to how we got to this particular point. There were extremely detailed surveys done using specialist contractors and consultants who specialise in this kind of monument. And they were, and those reports were shared with Historic England, and based on what could be done through external observation via a cherry picker, in essence, showed that what we thought at the time was that it was structurally sound, but that there were cosmetic issues that needed to be addressed. And inevitably, and there is a question about the original budgeting potentially, inevitably, that cannot give you the same level of information that you get when you have scaffolding up around the entire building and you have masons able to directly engage in the details of the construction and the state of the individual parts of the repair. There are things that just can't be done, even with a cherry picker, compared to being able to stand 10 centimetres away from the Buttercross and look carefully at what's being done. And if you have a look at some of the pictures that are attached, what became clear when there were signs of structural instability, and I would stress it absolutely, safety is the absolute starting point for all of this, as well, of course, as the maintenance and of an important part of our heritage. What became clear when there were some structural questions raised, and it is put together like a sort of large and quite complicated Lego bits all sitting on top of each other and joined together and pinned together. When they started to look at the quality of the stone and the iron and the metalwork that sat beneath that, it became clear that there were bigger problems that needed to be addressed. And that is why the cost has gone up. In essence, we have gone from a point where we were going to clean it And then there was some minor repair work with bits that had come off as a result of people pulling on them or weathering over the years, to a structural repair project. And that is quite different in nature and quite different in scale. And that wasn't what we expected, and it wasn't what our expert advisors had told us. I think that, so then the question is, how do we respond to that? The second point that comes out of this is that we have had, working alongside the architect and the masons, we've had very close support from Historic England. And in practice, while before you start work, shall we just say, the process of working with Historic England doesn't always quite proceed at the pace that one would want. And it did take a very long time to get a plan agreed. Once you do start work, I think our experience has been that it's been very positive and they've been very supportive, but they have served a notice that says we need to do something to make it structurally safe, an emergency works order. In terms of retendering, which was one of the ideas put forward, that would add months to the process. It's not something you can do quickly. It is highly specialist work. And we're in the situation where the people who have discovered and analysed the problem are going to be the best placed people to address it. And in particular, if they went away and were replaced by somebody else, then they would also have to learn what the problem was and how they were going to address it. So that is something that's addressed within the paper. There are other options which I don't think any of us would accept, would be to remove the bits that aren't potentially unstable, and I don't think we want to do that either. So the option in front of us is to proceed with full stabilisation and conservation works. There were references made to the businesses that are affected, and that is an important matter for us. It is going to take quite a few months, and we regret that. We have spoken with the businesses, we have put signage on the outside. By the way, for those of you who are interested in Norman medieval stonework, I do thoroughly recommend a visit to Montezuma's Chocolate Shop, which is one of the businesses affected by this. Because they have freed up their back wall, and you can actually see the walls of the Norman Palace at the back of Montezuma's. So if you're missing your dose of medieval stonework, that's my top tip for the day. Go to Montezuma's and have a look at some medieval stonework in there, and help them deal with the result of the buttercross being boarded up by buying some chocolate while you're at it. And for those of you who are interested in L'Occitane, I don't know if they have any medieval wool because I don't go in there. It's not my kind of product, but go there as well would be my request. And we are doing everything possible that we can to get the work done before Christmas. I think that addresses all the points. I don't know, we have Jeff Coe and Simon Hendy here. I don't know if there's any extra perspective you want to add to what I've just said, or corrections. I'm hoping this is an extra perspective, not a correction, Jeff.
I think a useful point of clarity on the reason for failure might be worth noting. So the 1990s, the repair involved putting an iron tie rod down the middle of the monument, and iron and stone don't go very well together, particularly when there's 5 or 6 types of different stone that all react differently to weathering and ferrous metals. So the inevitable happened, moisture got in, and from the inside, from the core of the monument, there were cracks appearing, which were bigger on the inside. I think the photographs in the report show this quite well, which were not that obvious from the outside. So it wasn't until we started work with the scaffolding up that we realised what was going on inside the thing. And so what we're doing is replacing that iron core with a stainless steel tie rod all the way through. And that means dismantling every section of the stonework. The heaviest bit is going to be 800 kilograms, which is a massive bit of
weight to move. So there's tightening cost in that. And we're replacing it with appropriate stainless steel expansion plates as well, because a lot of the expansion plates are medieval and of slate, and they've failed as well. So I think that might just help put some context about why it's in such a state that wasn't originally known.
That's very helpful. So in essence, there was the 1990s repair put in an iron rod, and we're replacing it with stainless steel. So the wonders of modern technology, and with very much with the mindset of not only do we preserve it for future generations, but we also make it completely safe as well, which is an absolutely critical priority. Councillor Cutler, you wanted to?
Yeah, I suppose my question is about documentation of the repairs, because clearly, in a way, as an answer to Councillor Horrell's question of why it wasn't picked up before, perhaps if there had been some understanding of, or more detailed understanding of what the repairs were in 1990, and as time moves on, people understand the effects and would have recognised that perhaps there was a problem there. And so I suppose my question is to make sure that everything that is done this time is well documented, and so there is a very clear understanding in the future of what has been done now. And even if there are certain areas where there are deterioration that isn't repairable now, that it's documented. So is that part of the process?
It will be. We will obviously hold our own records and full specifications, but also Historic England will have those records, which will be probably a more permanent source to go to.
Thank you. And actually, the work that was brought us to this point was informed by, there is the documentation from 1865. I don't know how much of it we have. And there is very definitely some documentation from 1991, but it is, I think we see as part of our duty with this project, not only to put in place the repairs that are needed to make it safe and beautiful for another century, but also to make sure there is the quality of record keeping, so that in 100 years' time, people are able to see what we did and how we did it. And they will undoubtedly have, probably, I'd be surprised if they didn't, better ways of dealing with it and new pressures to deal with within 100 years' time, due to things like climate change and other impacts, which the cross was not designed for. Are there any other questions? Councillor Porter.
Thank you. Two, actually. One, that there's a set of photographs in here, but also the description which we've been through today, which I think the public would be interested in around the site. So there is a certain amount of opportunity to not just record keep, but also inform the public. Will there be displays or anything about it? Because it will be shrouded in scaffolding for quite a long time, but it is a very important tourist opportunity for Winchester and for local people as well that want to know about it. And the second question is that, as you said, it's been a very popular tourist and local landmark. We've had demonstrations there, ice creams licked, surveys signed, all sorts of things. So in the final protection, will it just be from pigeons or will it be from humans as well?
So the first question,
is there going to be a fence around it or something?
On the first point, it's a good suggestion. That's something we thought about, and we will be pursuing that, given this limited space that we've got.
Yeah,
there. But it's a very good point, and it is fascinating, I think, for a wider audience. On the second point, no, we're not going to be fencing it. The pigeons, we're surprised it hasn't been vandalised more, given how
climb up it, don't they?
Yeah.
They do fine. So
we're hoping that there's going to be an ownership by the public of this by virtue of its restoration and how good it's going to look. And we'll have to deal with any vandalism, I think, as it arises.
I was just thinking overuse almost rather than vandalism. People do climb up it, young people.
Well, I mean, people shouldn't be climbing up it.
No,
and what part of the reason why bits have come off is because it is a medieval.
That's why I'm asking.
So we are making it safe. Okay, we are not making it a climbing frame.
No.
Okay, so, you know, as with any building, you know, there's the expectation is not the climb up and all over it. But, you know, should, for example, in 100 years' time, punk come back as a form of music genre, one would expect punks to be sitting on the Buttercross just as they did in the 1970s. So
That was a practical question.
yeah,
So
so-
we're not intending to fence.
right, we are making we will. There is no intention to make it a barriered off, you know, something that people do not have access to. It will. The intention is that
To go back.
people will come, we will come out at the end of this process and it will be cleaner, it will be safer, and the one group that will definitely find it a less pleasant place to be will be
Pigeons.
pigeons. You know, the language that is used in the Hampshire Chronicle today is they call it a necessary act of stewardship. Stewardship, I think, is a very good word. It is something that for generations, this council, its predecessors, the mayoralty has seen as part of their responsibility, apart from the Pavement Commission since 1770, obviously bad call. And I would say necessary makes it sound a bit too sort of negative. I would say it's an enthusiastic act of stewardship. We are very keen to keep this building special and safe, or this monument special and safe, and at the heart of our community and the heart of our city. Anyway, any further comments? Any debate? Councillor Becker.
Thank you. I think it's been said already, but the Buttercross is one of Winchester's most recognisable and historic landmarks. It stands at the heart of our city's identity. It's been a meeting place for residents and visitors for centuries. However, its condition has deteriorated now to a point where careful restoration is no longer optional, it is essential. Caring for the past is why, when I was the chair of the Town Forum, I established a working group in 2019 to focus on the heritage assets in the city, as they hadn't received the level of attention and care that they had deserved under the previous administration. While not strictly a town a Town Forum function, that's a tongue twister, it was considered appropriate to do so given that the council-owned assets heritage assets are primarily located in the city centre and the surrounding suburbs such as Hyde. That group has very ably continued to work with officers and put pressure on officers to look after our historic assets, and I think their work needs to be recognised. We need to thank them for the pressure and for their efforts in working with Historic England and officers and getting the restoration to the point that we're at now. By investing in the Buttercross, now we avoid greater costs later, we ensure public safety, and we demonstrate our commitment to responsible stewardship. There's that word again. This is a timely and necessary intervention to protect an irreplaceable asset at the heart of Winchester. Restoration is about more than preserving stone. It's about safeguarding our heritage, maintaining the character of our city centre and supporting our local economy. While there are inevitable effects for local businesses at the moment, which are unfortunate, visitors generally are drawn to Winchester because of places like the Buttercross. They come to see history on the streets, and the Buttercross is a fantastic example of that. The condition of the Buttercross sends a powerful message to those visitors and to our residents about how much we value our past and how we look to care for our city in the future. Like the famous watch brand says, you never actually own the Buttercross, you only look after it for the next generation. So I will be supporting this paper.
Any other comments or questions? Any comments? Really well. Councillor Cromwell.
Yes, thank you. I would just like to, I read the paper and I've asked questions in private session, and one of the things I would like to stress here is that it's not a 500% increase for what is the same work. It's actually, the reality is in a piece of work like this, you can't always know the full scope of the work until you really get up close and personal to the project. And you know, most of us in our day-to-day lives have not had to deal with an historic building. Maybe one or two people have owned an historic house that has needed a lot of work, and they found that. But I think many of us of a certain age have had the experience of taking a car into its MOT, expecting to be charged 50 or 60 quid or something like that, and they've come out shocked when the specialists have said you've got substantially more work needing to be done, and you're at the point where you can't drive it away, and you have to really just get on with it. And my own son, one of my sons, had that experience recently of it having an MOT and coming out with a bill for 1,300 quid. So in some respects, maybe we're getting away quite lightly here, given that it probably could have been a lot worse. So I have no problem with with supporting the principle here. As others have said, this is an historic asset. It's part. Winchester is a heritage city. We have no choice but to go ahead with this work and hopefully improve it from where it was on 1970 or other attempts to try and fix it, which perhaps less than successful. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I don't see any other comments for debate. Suffice it to say, what I'm hearing from everybody is that we have to go ahead with these works, that we want to go ahead with these works. It is our generation's contribution, one of our generation's contribution, we'll come on to another one in a minute, to the city centre, and possibly the most important visible centre of our city. So we have three recommendations in front of us. That we approve a supplementary estimate of £250,000 for works to the Buttercrofts funded from the property reserve, that we delegate authority to the corporate head of asset management in consultation with the cabinet member for place to enter into revised contract arrangements, and note the scheduled monument emergency works notice issued by Historic England and the requirement to undertake the works without delay. All of this makes it sound like it's more of a duty rather than something that we're enthusiastically taking on to ensure the Buttercrofts is safe and attractive and remains a vital feature at the centre of our city for hundreds of years to come. Cabinet, do you agree those recommendations?
Agree.
Thank you very much indeed. The next item is relates to Central Winchester regeneration. So item 10. I'm genuinely really excited and positive about the decision that we have in front of us today. As we all know, Central Winchester regeneration remains a huge opportunity for our city to refresh a tired area of the centre with new homes, new businesses, new public spaces, all done in a way that respects the nature of our very special city. And we've just talked about one of the things that makes it special. We've seen some inspiring design ideas at the recent engagement session, and they've generally had a very strong, positive response from the public. But it's safe to say that the CGI views didn't particularly feature the St Clement's surgery in the view. But it's important to note that the vision for Central Winchester has always included this site. It was in the Silver Hill programme. It was in the SPD. Now, because we stepped away from considering compulsory purchase for a few years, we weren't able to include St Clement's in the development agreement that is driving the current plans. And I would stress that we don't need this site to deliver against the current plans. That's not why we're making the decision, or proposing to make the decision today. But on a personal level, I was always concerned that we could develop a great scheme, but the great scheme would have a tired, end-of-life former GP surgery sitting in the middle of it, bringing the area down, blocking free movement around the area with a wall and fencing between the current bus station and the stops on Silver Hill, limiting design and development options for Coitbury House, and even in time for Woolstaplers Hall, and with protected rights to light and access, which also limit options for future designs. Having such a tired building wouldn't be true to what we're trying to do here, and what we've always been trying to do for as long as I've been on the council, whoever was in charge. Central Winchester has always been intended as an ambitious plan and a holistic plan for the centre, albeit one that will be delivered incrementally rather than with a big bang. But we also have to be prudent and ensure that the scheme fits with the wider financial and other needs of the council. And I also believe that this proposal does that. As I've always said, the hard bit of this process is finding someone willing to invest millions of pounds to develop a scheme and then bring in the funding to develop it. And that's taken a huge amount of our efforts in the last years and why we remain confident in the scheme as a whole. This proposal is a new opportunity on top for a better, more comprehensive redevelopment of our centre, avoiding a dilapidated mess in the middle of our redevelopment. It also strengthens the value of our holdings. There is serious so-called marriage value with this site, and the valuation makes clear how the council's land is worth significantly more with St Clement's included than without. Now, that on its own is not enough protection, and why officers and members ask for more. And paragraph 2.3 of the paper outlines the put option that is designed to deliver that. It commits Igloo to buying the site, and ensures that the decisions we make today will be followed through. In today's world, nothing can be said to be an absolutely safe risk, a safe bet, but it is a prudent one, and one which I believe offers really great opportunities for our city. So to sum up my thoughts on the paper in front of us today, is this decision essential for the specific Central Winchester Regeneration Development Agreement to go ahead? No. Does it open the way to a better scheme and a better redevelopment of the centre? Absolutely it does. And does it do so in a way that is prudent and right for the long term? I believe it does. There are some issues that scrutiny has asked us to consider, and I will be calling forward the chair of scrutiny to highlight those. And I will also want to hear the views of the Section 151 officer as well and consider those as well. But throughout all of this, we mustn't lose sight of the opportunity. At its heart, this is a great step forward for the regeneration of our centre, and I will be asking you to support the decision today. So, in terms of representations, what I propose to do is to take the visiting councillors first and then finish with the chair of scrutiny. So, Councillor Lee, would you like to come forward?
Thank you, Leader. I'll keep my comments and questions brief, as I don't think it's necessary for me to repeat or rehearse what I thought was an excellent debate in Scrutiny Committee under the chair of the new chair, Councillor Malcolm Wallace. The simple question for me is the council achieving best value for taxpayers given the total acquisition and holding costs? And I'll leave it there, and I'll ask Councillor Wallace obviously to pick up all the issues that were raised at scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Short and sweet. Could I ask Councillor Horrell to come forward and make her points?
Chair, thank you for an extensive discussion at scrutiny earlier this week, but I still feel we have some unanswered questions despite that session. Jigsaw declined the purchase, and it was not fully clarified at scrutiny why that was the case. If Jigsaw is so committed to the Central Winchester Regeneration Scheme, which we believe they are, then why did they pull out for what is a relatively small cost versus the total scheme? The report states that Jigsaw itself chose not to pursue the acquisition because of risks and JV changes. So I think this council must ask, why are we now being asked to take on a risk the private sector regeneration partner declined to accept? And the paper also states that negotiations with the owner and Jigsaw appear substantially advanced already. At what stage were members informed the council were considering intervening directly in the acquisition? And risk was a key question at the scrutiny meeting this week. We were advised that we're spending without a full assessment of the building condition, which again seems to add to the risk. And there was very little detail of meanwhile use, which is an important element to cover the costs in the short term of this building. Given the council is carrying acquisition risks, financing costs, holding costs, and potentially planning delay risk, what evidence is there that public funds are not effectively subsidising Jigsaw's future land assembly? As you know, Chair, I'm a huge advocate for Central Winchester regeneration, and I am optimistic that one day we will see this come to fruition. Indeed, though, just to clarify, we did redline this site in the SPD when that was put together. And although I understand that this site acquisition is not fundamental to ensuring that the scheme goes ahead, and I was grateful for your absolute clarification earlier in the week, and that there is a view that it would be a greater marriage value for the overall site to have it included. I do think we need to be very clear with our residents as to the current situation. I hope that some further clarification can be given to this important decision. I appreciate that it's before Cabinet today and you want to move forward. However, it is fundamental that we all know and understand completely how we will go forward and that we will be able to actually deliver what is being proposed in the paper. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. And then finally, could I have Councillor Malcolm Wallace, Chair of the Scrutiny Committee, to come forward and report back on that committee's deliberations. Right. Thank you, Chair. Scrutiny spent a significant amount of time on this item, around an hour and a half, which reflects both the importance of the decision and the range of risks and uncertainties that members wanted to explore in detail. The discussion was structured around three areas: the strategic case, the financial exposure, and delivery confidence, and I'll reflect those in my summary. So on the strategic case, the committee broadly understood the rationale. Members accepted that this is not essential to the delivery of the CWR scheme, but that it presents an opportunity to avoid a poor quality building remaining at the heart of the development, to improve design flexibility and enhance the overall coherence and value of the scheme. However, members emphasised that this is ultimately a judgment about relative risk and that Cabinet will need to weigh carefully the implications of proceeding against the implications of not doing so. There were also questions around the condition of the building and the realism of meanwhile uses, with some scepticism about how deliverable those uses would be in practice. On financial exposure, this was an area of significant focus and challenge from the committee. Members explored the basis of the valuation, the use of internal borrowing, and the potential ongoing holding costs. The key issue raised was the downside risk. While officers set out a worst case scenario, members were concerned that there remains real exposure if the option is not exercised, and the council would be left holding a non-performing asset for a period of time. There was also discussion about whether the building could realistically be let to mitigate costs and the impact on the wider capital programme, particularly given the need to use prudential borrowing. Members were not opposed to the principle, but were clear that the risk profile needs to be fully acknowledged and understood.
The third area was delivery confidence. This focused heavily on the role of Jigsaw, the structure of the option agreement, and the timing relative to planning and the wider programme. Members queried why Jigsaw had not acquired the site directly, what confidence there is that the option will be exercised, and what happens if it is not. There was some reassurance in the strength of the wider partnership and the obligations within the agreement, but a degree of residual uncertainty remains. Timing was also discussed, particularly the gap before planning consent and what happens in the interim period. Finally, members did touch on the reputational impact, noting the importance of having followed a robust and independent valuation process and being clear and transparent about decision making. The view was that not proceeding could also carry reputational risk, but the process must be beyond reproach. So in summary, members recognised the strategic opportunity, but emphasised that this is not a risk-free proposition and that Cabinet should be fully sighted on the financial downside, the delivery dependencies and the interim risks. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for chairing a very thorough and helpful discussion at the Scrutiny Committee. An important set of questions there that we need to address. Maybe we start with the question about the role of Jigsaw. And it's been framed in terms of why they're not buying it. I think the important question that we need to explore is it's not why they're not buying it, it's why they're not buying it now, because they are, as part of a legal agreement, committed to buying it. So my understanding is that the put option locks that in, and it's a question of phasing rather than whether it's happening or not. Maybe we could have a bit more perspective on that. Mr. Hendy.
Yes, thank you, Leader. That's precisely right. And just to answer one of the questions raised by Councillor Wallace in terms of them exercising the option, as was explained earlier to the Scrutiny Committee, the option will oblige Jigsaw to purchase the site. So it's not that they have the choice whether they purchase it or not. There will be conditions in that agreement, but they will be buying the site. That's the whole purpose of it being a put option. And secondly, the question was raised why they declined to purchase it. You could characterise it in a different way. They couldn't gain certainty on the ability to acquire the site in the timescale that was necessary so they could confidently design it and include it in the scheme at this point in time. And you'll see from the report in front of you that they'll part of the agreement that we will have in place will deal with that in the future and make sure that although the detail won't be dealt with in their planning application, that they'll be bringing forward later on in the year, the detail will be unreserved matters in the future.
Thank you. A second area that we've had highlighted relates to meanwhile use and the question of building condition. So now it's important to say that the valuation was done as when the site was previously looked at based on redevelopment value, rather than the value of the site in its current form. But so the price comes from that, and there's a point I think that Councillor Horrell talked about why, when it was in the SPD red line, wasn't included in this, because the SPD explicitly stated, and we decided to honour that, although in theory an SPD can't set that policy, that we were not going to use compulsory purchase. So inevitably we needed to get a move on, and at that stage there had not been a free agreement to purchase the site and be able to include it in the scheme. But so take us through, where are we with the building and its potential meanwhile use?
So as the paper sets out in paragraph 11.14, Jigsaw committed through the development delivery plan to implement a series of meanwhile uses and their overall approach to meanwhile uses in respect to Central Winchester. The discussions and negotiations with them about potentially taking a lease of the building centre around those meanwhile uses, and they have been around the building Previously, when they were negotiating directly with the owner and his agent, and again with us very recently, with a prospect with an operator to run those potential mean well uses. They're confident, and the state of the building that we've seen gives us confidence that they can be delivered.
That's useful. Thank you very much indeed. In terms of the third big area that I think colleagues have raised relates to the financial exposure. And how do the risks work in all of this? And what sort of risk appetite are we taking on? I don't know if this is something. So, I mean, that slightly ties into the nature of the put option. I know that the Section 151 officer need, am I right in saying that you want to provide some perspective on the financial risk profile?
Yes, thank you, Leader. If Cabinet go ahead with this acquisition of this property and the delegations that are set out in the report this morning, I will reassure Cabinet that I and my colleagues will do our very best to negotiate the best and least risky put option with the developer. However, at this particular point in time, there are still some unknowns because that negotiation hasn't taken place. So I would just highlight for the purposes of this morning's discussion, firstly, that the length of the window leading up to the backstop date for the put option is not known yet. So consequently, we don't know the period of time that the council would have to hold this asset and generate a meanwhile use income to mitigate the cost of holding it. And secondly, the number of residential units and the extent of commercial floor space, etc. We don't know what will ultimately be agreed for that. So it's not possible for me to quantify the benefit to the scheme at this particular stage. Whilst the put option will commit the developer to purchase the asset from the council, a risk remains that the market value will have decreased since the point where the acquisition takes place, and that would crystallise a loss for the council. And that in a worst case scenario, if the developer entity were to become insolvent or to be wound up before that put option is exercised, that remains a risk for the council. So we would therefore look to mitigate that by putting in place something like a parent company guarantee or other similar mitigation from the developer. But all of that said, it's for Cabinet to weigh up the risks of these unknowns with the rewards to the Central Winchester Regeneration Scheme. And as Councillor Wallace summarised, this was discussed in detail by the Scrutiny Committee.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And I think there's a few points that we probably need to clarify in all of this. One is, so we do have an assessment which we may want to discuss and exempt, and we'll have a discussion about whether we discuss and exempt of how many properties can be put onto that site has been done by our consultant JLL. So we're using that as the starting point. And the market value of the put option is the market value of the site with planning permission, which I think is also quite an important point to highlight. So at that point, we will know how many properties are on the site, and the value of the land will reflect the development value of that of the final proposal that's in the planning. Is that, I mean, Mr. Hendy, do you want to provide some extra perspective on that?
Yes, thank you, Leader. I think paragraph 11.12 pulls out the main elements that would be in the option agreement with Jigsaw, although as the Director of Finance has said, we don't have the detail at this point in time. Would be subject to negotiation, but as part of that agreement, there will be a minimum number of residential units and commercial floor space which we will require Igloo to design. And you're right, that is contained in the exempt part of this agenda because that's the basis on which your independent property consultants have established what the market value for the site would be. There will also be in that agreement some backstop dates for planning application to be submitted. As I said earlier, this wouldn't be included in detail in the planning application from Jigsaw for the overall site, although it's expected that reserve matters for phase 2, which this will fall into, will pick this up. And so we can be relatively confident in terms of timescales on that, if not from your own perspective, but the local planning authority's perspective. And lastly, the value of the site subject to the planning consent that they achieve will be subject to independent verification at that point in time. So it won't be the developer's view of what that site would be worth because of the planning consent. We will write as the agreement will get independent verification at that point in time as well.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Before we go through the paper in detail, which I think we do need to do for a decision of this kind, or make sure we've covered each section. Are there any other high-level questions from Cabinet colleagues that you would like to have addressed? Actually, I do have a question. Maybe it's for Councillor Cutler. I mean, we are leaning for our risk appetite. Where do we stand for that for this kind of project?
Well, we did slightly amend our risk appetite in the risk strategy paper earlier this year, which did allow us to be more open to risk in this particular area of redevelopment and regeneration. I think I need to remind Cabinet that, you know, risk is quantified, I suppose, around likelihood and impact. And we need to look at those more closely, perhaps, as we discuss all these risks. For example, the likelihood, when we look at the likelihood of our partner becoming insolvent in the time, it is probably not high, but the impact, if we look at the impact just on this purchase, would not necessarily be that great an impact because we would still hold the asset. But actually the impact on the whole scheme, if Jigsaw went, became insolvent, would be huge. But the effect on this particular decision wouldn't be huge. So there are whole areas of risk that we need to look at in terms of both likelihood and impact, and actually be realistic about that. And so rather than just talking about there are risks, there are always risks, but we do need to sort of look at them in a little bit more detail, perhaps, as to what we mean when we're talking about risks, because, you know, if they're low likelihood and low impact, they're still risks, but they're risks that we can deal with. We can withstand because we have an open risk appetite.
I think that's an important point that we need to discuss in more depth, because the point with the risk is that if there is a problem with the whole development, and that's certainly not the plan and not the intention and not the timetable we're working to, ironically, the risk of this land purchase is relatively low because it gives us a larger site of the kind that Councillor Horrell believes we maybe needed right at the beginning of the process. And it is an integrated site where the problem of the two separate buildings of Coitbury and St Clements has gone away. And if we're in a situation where we're finding a new partner or disposing of the land or whatever, then that extra value is actually baked in because they're no longer two separate land holdings. Are there, Councillor Porter?
Tying up with the conversations that our Section 151 officer made, giving 4 years, is there a specific reason why 4 years was chosen as a length of time for the put option? That's my understanding in the paper. Was that to be discussed in confidential session?
I think it will relate to that relates to the development agreement timetable, I would imagine. But well, let's go on to that. If we just go through the paper, the first one is the implications in terms of council plan outcome. I think the feedback we had from the scrutiny committee, and I think that the case made in this paper is fairly clear on that. The financial implications, We've talked about the value, and that was scrutinised in great depth. We've talked about there's the option, the 4-year option. 4 years, does that relate to the overall timetable for the development? I imagine I can't. Oh,
Yes, leader. So the site is within phase 2 of Jigsaw's current plans, which means that it won't come, phase 2 wouldn't be coming forward until 29-30 anyway. But within that period of time, they'll be building out phase 1. And during that process, from roughly 27 to 29, they'll be seeking reserve matters on the outline part of the application for phase 2. And so it's felt reasonable to include a requirement for them to then pick up and design that portion of the site within that period of time.
That's helpful. So in other words, if we look at the timetable that we're currently working to, then naturally that then is the right moment for them to be purchasing the site and putting it into the next, or rather completing the purchase of the site and putting it into the next phase of the plan, fulfilling the put option. Okay, and any other questions on this section? So it highlights the option to purchase, and I think we've made it clear that this is one that is effectively a binding option, which is the way to think about it, rather than they have the choice to buy. It is a requirement to buy, as Mr. Hendy has highlighted. We have the holding costs, although that, yeah. The meanwhile use ahead of transfer. And what isn't talked about here is what other opportunities it operates within the overall portfolio that we have, but it's not really something appropriate to talk about in this discussion, but there may well be opportunities in terms of how it interrelates with our other land holdings, which I suggest we talk about either in exempt or separately. Any other questions about the finances? Yeah, there is an exempt appendix. Will colleagues, either do any visiting councillors want to make further comments on the exempt appendix, or do cabinet colleagues want to talk about that? It did get a lot of coverage at scrutiny. I'm not seeing visiting councillors. I don't know if is Councillor Wallace coming back, because he is down. Right, okay. Well, I'll ask him if he comes back, but for the time being, I'm not seeing a requirement. The papers are fairly self-evident. The legal and procurement implications, this is an important section, because what it says is that what we're doing is consistent with the DA. It isn't actually a change to the DA, it's something that sits alongside it, and that we do have the powers to do this. Is that a fair statement? Yeah. Workforce implications, property and asset implications, fairly straightforward. Environmental implications, data protection, risk management. Is there anything in here that we haven't talked about? I think what this highlights that we haven't talked about is, and slightly ties into a point that Councillor Wallace made, which is what is the risk of not doing this? And that the site ends up in the hands of some random person who we don't know, and then in order to get a good comprehensive redevelopment of the centre, we're relying on the power of the SPD, but we will not have the option of having the marriage site, the marriage or the opportunities that represented by having Coitbury House and St Clements in the same ownership. Councillor Lerney.
Yeah, I think there's a further thing which we haven't touched on, which we are aware of, which is around the access rights from the surgery over the bus station site, which do cause a few issues for the scheme, and which we will have to sort out in some shape or form anyway. And while that's a minor consideration when we're looking at the whole thing, it is all of these little things which add up to say it's sensible to have a look at dealing with it all in one go.
Indeed, and it does also highlight the opportunity of, shall we say, improving east-west connectivity across the development, which is quite important. We don't suddenly have a big blocker sitting in the middle, which particularly when seen in combination with the current ownership of Woolstaples Hall and the associated wall and everything that goes with it, actually means that you have a kind of long wall in the middle of the development blocking movement backwards and forwards, which is very much against the spirit of what we're trying to do in that part of the city. Okay, what have we got? I think the other elements here we've talked about. In terms of the supporting information, some of the points there talked about the timetable, I think are outlined in that paper. And it highlights the point that Councillor Lerney's just made about rights to light and rights to access. Highlights the point about the timetable of planning and provides more detail on the put option. And then it brings us to the choice that we have, which is to either buy it or not to buy it. And on the one hand, on buying it, I think the strategic case is very clear in terms of the benefits that it offers for central Winchester regeneration. And the risks we need to consider are primarily financial, and do we have the scale of mitigation in place? You know, is it absolutely nailed on safe decision in terms of financial risk? Or frankly, anything to do with regeneration at the moment, when we have an American president who keeps declaring war on random countries and closing off major waterways and trade, with all the impact on costs, is there's always going to be risk on anything that seeks hundreds of millions of pounds of investment from other people. But where do we stand in terms of where we sit with that risk? Anybody want to add any points to that? Are there any further points to make on this? Any further questions? So any further questions from Cabinet on this? Any points that feel that we haven't properly looked at? We had the presentation from Councillor Wallace. I'm just going to have a quick look through the minutes. I think we obviously discussed those points at that meeting. We talked about the valuation, we talked about the financial exposure, the interim and meanwhile use. The cost of holding it. I think we've covered all those issues. Is there anything else? Councillor Wallace, you weren't here, but I did ask whether we wanted to go into exempt session. We did have a very thorough discussion in exempt at your committee. But if there were points you wanted to make that required us to go into exempt session, then obviously we will do so. You're shaking your head. I'm assuming that means no. Okay. Right. So we have the paper in front of us. Is there any debate in terms of this purchase from Cabinet colleagues? Councillor Cutler.
Thank you, Leader. I mean, I think it's clear that in all the discussions and in scrutiny, that the strategic case is well made for this purchase. the concerns are around the financial risks associated with that. And they sort of seem to fall into two categories. One is the cost of holding over a period of 4 years, which is not substantial, but would obviously, and we have some confidence that Jigsaw believe that they can find the meanwhile uses, and there is some car parking there, so there is some car parking income there. I don't believe that the risk on the holding costs over the 4-year period of the option agreement are too great for us to not take the decision. In terms of the risks around the option, the put option not being exercised because of insolvency, I think that is a minimal risk, and actually the impact caused by this purchase would be minimal compared with the impact on the whole scheme. And in fact, as I think Councillor Todd pointed out, that the marriage value then of the remaining land, if we've reached that unfortunate point, is actually enhanced rather than reduced. So in fact, the purchase in itself probably reduces the risk of that long-term problem. So I'm therefore confident that we've really looked in detail at the risks around this, and that because the strategic case is well made, although there are risks, they are not sufficient to not go ahead with this. I ought to be more positive and say they are minimal, and so we should go ahead.
Okay, I think that's very helpful. Any other points of debate? Councillor Cremorne.
I really just want to pick up on the points, some of the points that have been raised earlier. I mean, I think acquiring this particular property, as is stated in the report, says will enable a more comprehensive regeneration scheme than if it's not brought forward as part of the overall scheme in the long run. So I think that will actually create a better scheme overall, and as the leader has identified, will help with the east-west flow through as well. So to me, it makes sense to do it, and from what I can tell from the exempt report and the whole report as a whole, the valuations seem to be supported by independent advice, and can fully support that we go ahead with this.
Okay, well, thank you all very much indeed. Thank you to colleagues at Scrutiny for the third degree that we got over this decision, but it was important that that was done. Where I am on this is that there is a clear strategic benefit for Central Winchester regeneration, and thinking for the long term, that is a very significant benefit, I would say. The benefit of having a more complete regeneration of the centre and a properly integrated site without a tired former GP surgery sitting in the middle of it, or being in the hands of somebody who we don't know who they are, what they would intend to do with it. There is the marriage value, which genuinely helps offset, I think, financial concerns, and the financial benefit of having a better scheme. And the combination of those two, combined with the put option, combined with the fact that we have got an independent report on its valuation, says that while nothing is risk-free, and we do need, those negotiations on the details of the put option will be important, that we have a decision that we can prudently proceed with. We will need to stay close to the meanwhile uses and how we offset the holding costs in the next few years. That's an important thing, and it needs to be seen in the context of all our holdings within the city and the opportunities it presents for us. But based on that, based on ultimately, when I take a big step back, what our ambition has been for the regeneration of the city and the regeneration of this tired and run down part of our city for so long, I would say that the benefits that I can see in the decision, the work that has been done to minimise our risk and our exposure, means that on balance, this is a prudent decision to take. It's not a risk-free decision, but it is the right decision. So the recommendations we have in front of us today are, and at its heart, it takes us back to where we started with all of this. We can have a regenerated part of our city centre with new homes, new businesses, fantastic new public spaces. We've seen inspiring designs for what's going to be possible here. That's really what we're talking about, unlocking, and all done in a way that really respects how special our city is, which again is not straightforward, but is something that we are on track to deliver. So I do think this is part of, an important part of, and a real opportunity for a hugely important project for this council and for this area. So the recommendations we have in front of us are to authorise the strategic director with responsibility for Central Winchester regeneration to complete the acquisition of the former St Clement's surgery, to approve a supplementary capital estimate of £260,000 funded by prudential borrowing and capital receipts, to bring the budget to 2.877 million, to approve the capital expenditure of 2.877 million for the acquisition of the former St Clement's surgery, to approve an ongoing revenue budget of £53,000 for security, business rates, maintenance and utilities until such time as a lease to Jigsaw is in place, to authorise the strategic director with responsible for Central Winchester regeneration and the director of finance to negotiate and finalise the terms of an option agreement for the former St Clement's surgery with Jigsaw, and to authorise the strategic director with responsibility for Central Winchester regeneration to explore the meanwhile uses for the former St Clement's surgery with Jigsaw and agree an approach that best mitigates the holding costs. Those are the recommendations in front of us. Cabinet, do you agree? Good, thank you very much indeed. Onward and upward, and thank you very much indeed to Mr. Baker and Ms. Taylor for the work that has been done to bring this to this point, and also Ms. Keys and her team and Mr. Hendy and the rest of his team. So the next item is the Bar End Depot disposal, item 11 on the agenda. This one I think is more straightforward. We've wanted to sort this site out for some time. All the engagement we've had all the way through has been clear about the importance of the community shop and affordable housing. We also want improved access and permeability through the site. We did have a choice on this one, and that's probably the core thing at the heart of this. Do we want a shop that was bigger than our planning policy stated, or the convenience store that our engagement and our policy asked for? And did we want more or fewer affordable homes? And we're talking about 88 or 8 in essence. And is the financial impact a price we're willing and able to pay? Legally able and politically and financially willing. We've been through a long and careful process to get to this point. We considered all these issues. We had, again, a good discussion and debate at the Scrutiny Committee, and I'm sure Mr. Wallace, or Councillor Wallace, will tell us all about that. The resulting paper is in front of you today. I believe this is the right decision. It offers the strongest way forward, but obviously we will take the representations from visiting councillors and have our own debates before making a final decision. So I have Councillor Lee, Councillor Godfrey, and then Councillor Wallace to report back from the Scrutiny Committee. Councillor Lee, would you like to come forward and make your points?
Thank you, Leader. I'm not going to repeat everything we said at scrutiny. I think this disposal is welcomed as it puts a blighted site into productive use to meet the district housing and local community need, and good to have a brownfield site reused. What I'd like to do is just pick up on an unanswered question scrutiny, focusing on the number of housing units. As we know, 1,715 people registered for affordable homes in the district. And what we have before us is a proposal to address only 5% of the need. Clearly, I understand the developers' viability challenges and the planning constraints. But my question is, in the design framework, did we at any stage consider adjusting the height constraints to achieve more housing on the site, especially with consideration to maybe more affordable homes or social homes? After all, there are many in need who only have a budget for a social rent. Affordable rents are still too high. And my quick calculation would suggest adding 1 or 2 additional stories to parts of the scheme would potentially increase delivery for 1 story, maybe up to 107 units, and potentially up to 132 for a 2nd story, of course, subject to planning, massing, setbacks, amenity considerations. So I just want to highlight, obviously, as we all know, air is cheap, and we should be considering the rise of airspace development whenever possible, which has been done elsewhere in the UK, especially on existing buildings. And by having more units could improve the viability, more genuinely affordable homes and social. So it also allow lower service charges and energy and utility systems costs and other charges. So in sum, we're helpful to understand if this approval was considered, did consider the redevelopment in terms of additional units set against the constraints. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you very much. I'm a bit worried about speaking to you, Leader, after your assertion that punk is dead. Wayne County electric chairs is going around in my head all the day. Yeah. Last October, news of the withdrawal of a previous purchaser for the Bar End depot site was met with disappointment across the council. Given the importance of using this council-owned land efficiently, that has been largely redundant for the last 7 years. I was one of many who called for the council to move forward quickly with a deliverable scheme to make efficient use of the site. My preference was to build council homes there, rather than again seeking to offer the site to the open market, raising a risk of a repeat of a failure of a previous scheme. However, I must commend our estates team and other officers involved in attracting such an interesting new preferred bidder that intends to build 82 affordable homes with retail space at a high density. The need to provide more homes across Winchester on brownfield sites is essential. Any scheme that helps protect the countryside from unnecessary development is to be welcomed, and one that delivers affordable, hopefully rented homes is good news. It will be an even better scheme if the council can be actively involved in the management of those tenancies. The scheme might not be perfect in every detail as far as some people are concerned, but it can be, if it can be completed in anything approaching that described in this paper, I will certainly welcome it.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And Councillor Wallace, Chair of Scrutiny Committee, would you like to come forward and report back on the discussions?
Thank you, Chair. So this item received a more concise discussion at scrutiny, but it was still constructive. The committee focused on two areas: the balance of value and deliverability. On the balance of value, the central issue is clear. The council is choosing to accept a lower financial return in order to secure significant public benefit, particularly the delivery of 82 affordable homes and a community facility. Members were broadly supportive of that approach in principle and welcomed the focus on affordable housing. However, they did explore the tenure mix, the balance between social rent and shared ownership, and the extent to which the proposed numbers and mix can be secured through the planning process. So the key message is support for prioritising social value, but with an interest in how firmly these outcomes are locked in. The second theme was deliverability. Members sought reassurance on the strength and track record of the preferred bidder, the role of Homes England funding, site constraints such as contamination, and what safeguards are in place if planning is delayed or not achieved. Overall, the committee was comfortably reassured on these points. So in summary, scrutiny was supportive of the direction of travel, particularly the focus on affordable housing, while emphasising the importance of securing the agreed housing outcomes and maintaining confidence in delivery. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And so good to hear from colleagues that there's general support for the proposal that's in front of us today. There are some questions which I think tie slightly into what the disposal process is. In terms of how tightly we can define what is in what the preferred bidder does. As I understand it, obviously we have the control of the planning process, but otherwise, to a degree, we're dependent on what they present to us. So maybe it'd be quite helpful to clarify that, because this is not a joint development project. This is people coming to us with proposals for what they want to do, and then we're choosing between them. But it might be helpful if somebody could clarify exactly what that process is. I don't know if that's going to be you, Mr. Coe, Mr. Hendy, or Mr. John. Who wants to have a go?
So the disposal of assets in local government is governed by a separate set of regulations to procurement. So we're not procuring any services here, and we're precluded from specifying anything within the development other than compliance with planning policy. So we can't stipulate, for example, the tenure mix that the purchaser chooses. We can't stipulate the type of design and access. Those are all planning issues. So we're actively prevented from being too prescriptive, but Gareth might be able to elaborate on that.
No, I'd simply echo that. This is an open market disposal. We went through an open market exercise, and you don't tend to impose restrictions on the use. Otherwise, that would obviously hamper the value of the site at that time.
Presumably, to what degree are people bound by what they said they were going to do when they put their bid into us?
Yes, Lee, just to help on the question of the affordable housing delivery on the site, excuse me, this is a qualifying site for affordable housing. So your normal planning policies will apply to the site. It's a brownfield site, so as you'll know, 30% of the site should be affordable housing anyway, and the normal planning policy in terms of tenure will apply to that. But because the marketing process has been undertaken, we've secured places for people. You have the bonus of another 50 units of affordable housing that ordinarily you wouldn't have the case if this was a conventional private development on the site.
If it might be helpful, Leader, there is obviously the exempt appendix which sets out the heads of terms, which gives the broad scope of the development, and clearly you're agreeing that today. If there was a significant variation between what was in the heads and the negotiation with the developer, then the officer team would have to revert on that. But we can obviously go into exempt session for further discussion on that as you wish. Thanks.
That's helpful. I suppose my question was, they can't tear up that heads of terms agreement as soon as the disposal's been made. It is we are able to put those conditions onto the process from this point onwards. Is that a fair statement? Yeah, I mean, otherwise it would be a fairly pointless appendix, really, wouldn't it? You're looking like you want to say something, Mr. Kerr. That's fine. Good.
Only that Places for People are a very established housing provider. They were established in 1965. They have a vast portfolio. They provide affordable housing and private rented housing. Their business doesn't do anything else other than that. I suppose if they change their model, it would be to private rented, but that's not what's on the table. We're exchanging on the basis of a 100% affordable scheme. So if that's not what they end up delivering, then they will be in breach of the contract.
Okay. And I think, am I right? Is there an opportunity? Do we have any opportunities? I mean, obviously they're developing them separately. Do we have any opportunity in terms of them being council housing at some point in the future? Was that?
So we've negotiated a high level option of first refusal effectively on this. So if they decide to sell, then we will have first refusal on that. The legal definitions and narrative around that have got to be defined more clearly in the documents, but that's the principle. We can't force them to sell if they don't want to. They build affordable housing, and within their 6 operating companies, they manage them as well. And just to clarify a point I made earlier, the private rented housing they deliver is always in conjunction with places like businesses like Urban Splash and Igloo, so they don't do it on their own.
Okay. Cabinet colleagues, do you have any questions on this paper? Councillor Porter.
I'm assuming that because the Homes England support this site, that there'll be a very, very strong mitigation for climate change for this particular site. It's really important because it's very, very densely developed. So following on really from Councillor Lee's point, and we want to have the highest standards for coping with climate, particularly the height eventually might be different from the height that's stated here at the moment. So I'm just very keen to make sure that there is the strongest mitigation for climate change. Is that in the contract or have I missed that? And the second thing was that the character of the streets and the street scene of Bar End Road is lacking compared to many of the other street scenes on many of the other entrances. I came down Alsford Road this morning into Winchester, and it has a really strong character all of its own, as do all the others, but Bar End Road doesn't. Is this going to be part? I don't see it in the description, but that will obviously be part of the planning process. And can I be assured that that is going to be part of the planning process?
Second point, yes, that very much is part of the planning process. The first point, Places for People believe in developing and creating thriving, sustainable communities for people to live in, and it's not in the contract, but it's part of their modus operandi. That's how they do things. On this particular site, apart from some weeds, there is no biodiversity. So there's a huge opportunity to improve that on the site, and they will. I
was thinking more of the humans actually, to make sure the humans on site are well looked after. I appreciate there's very little growth green on there. I just really want to make sure those buildings are of the highest environmental standards.
I mean, to a certain extent, this is in the local plan.
It is,
That's
but
why
I
we
just
put
want
it
to
there.
make sure
And the
that
local
there's been
plan
no.
applies.
I'm
And
just
there's
making
you can't give an exemption to the local plan. The
I'm
local
just
plan
making
is
sure that that is the case and putting it in the public arena. That's all, to make sure it's in the public arena.
Well, I think the requirement is to meet the local plan, and the local plan has some of the highest environmental standards of any local plan in the country. So that is, it's a given, I think. Isn't
Again, we can't impose those conditions under disposal, but I think it's worth looking at their website, you'll see how sizable they are and how they work with their communities at all stages of life. So,
Yeah, I'm aware.
yeah.
Thank you.
In terms of height, because that got touched on. I mean, presumably, well, we won't talk about the details of the contract, but there's a minimum expectation in terms of the contract. I mean, my recollection of that area, when I think back to the planning for the leisure centre, was, to put it mildly, the view from the South Downs National Park is a bit of a thing. So if we were to suddenly start chucking on extra stories there above and beyond what's in the local planning policy and within the design framework, in principle, there's nothing to stop them, because it's for them to get planning approval. But I don't think we would think that they're lowballing the numbers. And actually, if they do, then they do. I mean, that's. But you want to say something?
Yes, thank you, Leader. You'll see from the exempt part of the report there is significant market interest in this site, and clearly that competition developers would look to maximise the potential in development terms. And if they thought that there was the ability to go higher on this site, that would be reflected in their bids, but at the same time they would be factoring in possible planning risk in doing that, in terms of making their proposal. So I think because of the extensive competition, you can be confident that this is the best offer that's available in terms of the value of the site and maximising the number of units that be contained on it.
Is a really important point. It has been a very competitive process to get to this point. Okay, have we covered all the points raised, and is there anything in the document that we need to have a look at? I think we've talked about the financial implications. We've talked about the procurement process, how it is a disposal. It's not a procurement of service. We've talked about the policy fit, the fact of the scoring of the different options. We've talked about how it fits with the consultation that's going on. We've touched on the environmental opportunity, and that was also something that was talked about at scrutiny, and questions were answered there. I think that covers all the points within it. Yeah, so it does highlight the 11.4 talks about scoring, and we all had a chance to read the papers for that and see what underpin it. If somebody wanted to ask questions, they could. We talked about the heads of terms, that the bits that matter are within 11.5, I think, of great interest to this decision. We've talked about best consideration and other options. So I think we have covered everything here. And again, we had a good scrutiny discussion about this. So maybe I'll just move. Oh, well, is there any debate? Councillor Lerney.
Thank you. I do agree that the design framework is not something to be lightly thrown aside. As has been said, not only was it supported by local people, but this is a site which affects the setting of the national park. In Councillor Reach's absence, I think it's also appropriate to say a little bit about the housing need that we have, because it's something that I have sight of as part of the New Homes programme. And as has been said, the final housing mix will emerge through the planning process. But I think there is an important point to make, that while the bulk of need is for those smaller properties, particularly one bedroom, if you track how long people are waiting for a home, those in need of larger homes actually face much longer waits than those who are happy to take a 1 or 2 bedroom flat. We also see, in fact, that those qualifying for 2-bedroom homes are willing to wait for a house rather than take a flat, because actually, as an authority, we are being so successful in creating affordable homes that there is that opportunity simply to wait a few months and use the using the methods we have for choosing a house, rather than just having to take what's on offer. I think this is clearly the best value offer. It's a great outcome for local people. I think achieving the local shop, the affordable housing and improved access to the leisure centre without significant traffic generation that they have been asking for. So I'm incredibly supportive of this.
Thank you very much.
I think that Councillor Onley's just said exactly what I wanted to say. It's just really heartening to think that we can make a difference in this part of the city and bring the opportunity to use the leisure centre so directly to another very large community of people at the same time providing the convenience store. It's a really heartening process and looking forward to seeing the buildings in place.
Any other? No, I can only echo what colleagues have said. This is great news. This is, you know, a large number of new affordable homes on top of the ones that we've already delivered in partnership, you know, in Kings Barn, Whiteley, the new buildings that we've put into Highcliffe and Stanmore, Winnell and Stanmore. So lots of good news as far as delivery of new affordable housing within the district. So positive news in those terms, more than I think we might have ever expected, actually, in terms of what we were going to get from the site, and particularly if I compare it to where we were with the previous proposal that fell through. We're also delivering the community shop, which we have heard, you know, we have heard back, or the convenience store, which we've heard back so many times from that community is needed in that area. So all in all, a very positive proposal. And so I think the feedback from the scrutiny committee, the feedback from colleagues here today is that we should be proceeding. So the two recommendations we have in front of us. Oh yeah, sorry. Can I just double confirm that we don't wish to go into exempt to discuss the exempt appendix or appendices? I'm not seeing visiting councillors want to do that. I'm not seeing cabinet colleagues want to do that. I'm assuming we've all read them, had a chance to think about them, reflect them in our decision making. But we don't need to go and discuss them further. And it's, I think, useful that the discussion happens in public. So the two recommendations are: one, that we approve a conditional freehold sale contract subject to planning with places for people developments on terms set out in the exempt heads of terms of Appendix 6, and that authority be delegated to the strategic director to agree final details of the contract of sale within the parameters set out in Appendix 6. Cabinet, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Into the last straight. Item 12, call for finance and performance monitoring. Councillor Cutler.
Thank you, Leader. This is the final quarterly performance report for the 25-26 financial year, covering the period 1st of January to 31st of March. As is usual with the final performance report of the year, the full year financial position is not included, as this will be reported separately with the outturn report in September. There has been one change to the report, and that is that following adoption of the Winchester District Local Plan by full council, the Tier 1 project highlight report has been updated to report on progress on the next local plan. No other changes have been made to the format. Highlights from the report include a collection of 13 to 14 tonnes a day of food waste, the £1 million of SIL funding that's gone into community-led projects, the adoption of the local plan, the approval of a balanced budget, and the increase in the council's number of low carbon electric fleet vehicles through the procurement of 4 vehicles to be used by special maintenance. The scrutiny committee went through this report in quite a lot of detail, and a significant number of questions were answered at the meeting. There were a few points that I was asked to bring answers to Cabinet on. One was around the solar PV project at Meadowside, the Meadowside Leisure Centre. There have been delays partly because the scheme has been value engineered to emit an air source heat pump, which is no longer viable. The works have been re-tendered for the solar panel installation only, and there is quite a a long lead time now for solar panels because of high demand. I mean, this is also true in the new River Park Pavilion as well. So that explains the delay on the Meadowside project there. There was also a question about the total number of visits to the Meadowside Leisure Centre. The explanation in the paper was the closure of the football pitches, and I think that is the main reason behind it. There was a question at scrutiny as to whether the park run attendees were included in the figures. They're not, so we can be clear about that. There was a question about the local area energy plan, and there was some confusion in the report. I think acknowledged that I think the timetable was for delivery by March. It is actually complete, but it hasn't yet to be to be published. I think that's really what the position we're in, and that should be within the next few weeks. I understand from Councillor.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. And then finally, there was a request to understand a little more about what the minor LC WIP projects within Winchester were, and so I have a list of them here which I can read out, which is Hillier Way cycle improvements, Garnier Road to St Catherine's cycleway improvements, installation of an uncontrolled pedestrian crossing at the entrance on Barfield Close, simplified and improved signage at Dolman Road and Wharf Hill, removal of redundant signs, refresh road markings for existing pedestrian crossings on Water Lane, redesign the layout for improved accessibility and coherence for users at the Middlebrook Street North Walls Junction, and improvement to the tactile pavement area at Middlebrook Street Friars Gate. So that's the list of that I would have, if I'd had them at my fingertips, presented to scrutiny. So, leader, that that completes my introduction.
Thank you, Leader. I'm not going to repeat what you'll be hearing from Councillor Wallace and what you've seen in the scrutiny report. I just want to expand on a few things which I think are topical and of some concern. So I think it's only right and fitting to focus on some of the performance issues with respect to the carbon neutrality programme. And I make no apologies for repeating some aspects from scrutiny. Very topical given the unprecedented temperatures we're experiencing at the moment. I believe we have a delivery gap, which I'm sure Councillor Linney will respond to, with respect to decarbonising corporate assets, Guildford, the Guildhall and city offices and the Winchester Sports and Leisure Centre, which I believe are at risk, not helped by our solar farm business cases effectively closed. District carbon monitoring remains 2 years in arrears. Several projects are described as in infancy, and the original carbon neutrality roadmap may need some adjustment due to our adoption of AI, growth and digital cloud demand. If unmanaged, that latter issue creates risks for hidden Scope 3 emissions that undermine our climate credibility. If governed properly, AI could become a net enabler of CNAT delivery through operational efficiencies. So which is it? These issues do not detract from the many good things, as we said at scrutiny, the 35 solar PV batteries on council homes, green vehicles, but there's no mention of actions in the next quarter. But I believe the obvious question is, how do we ensure we get maximum decarbonisation? What corrective actions are planned? I did have a question. It wasn't answered. Noted there will be staff travel survey to feed data required for council's annual carbon footprint in 25-26. But why not include councillors? I don't understand why we wouldn't do that. The merger of MER UK Public Charging Network with BEE will affect, I believe, the EV charge points within council car parks. A change of operator can materially alter the original commercial assumptions underpinning existing arrangements, including the potential for tariff increases, revised pricing structures, and so on, and changes to revenue sharing models. So what are the possibilities here? Are they negative or positive going forward? And obviously there is, as we've just heard, the emergence of our local authority energy plan, which is very welcomed. But I understand it will inform the level of investment required in electric vehicle charging points across the district. Is that correct? And is there a timetable for that? A question I asked last scrutiny was the metering and telecom resilience issue. The report notes migration from 2G to 4G energy metering has already caused connectivity issues. Is a broader resilience strategy needed for telecom transition and future PSTN shutdown issues? And finally, we know and we've heard about the local plan, the 2044 timetable pressures. The council is simultaneously implementing its local plan 2040 while preparing the 2040 plan under a changing national planning system. The government's new 30-month timetable is challenging. And it seems to me, obviously, this very compressed programme indicates reliance on consulting support. Is there enough uncertainty around the MPPF and NDMP framework, and all concurrent with LGR pressures? So is our programme realistic in terms of delivery? Do we have the staff resilience? And are there any potential worries about further changes to national reforms coming down the line? Thank you.
The questions there. Yeah, I hope you're ready over there. And Councillor Horrell.
Chair, thank you for allowing me to address Cabinet again. I think on Tuesday of this week, although we had an extensive discussion about the performance report, there were a number of questions that obviously Councillor Cutler kindly followed up on today, but I do think there is perhaps an opportunity for the new Chair of Scrutiny to look at how the meeting can be used as effectively as possible to address issues that are meaningful to the council, and to try and work more efficiently in terms of scrutinising the outcomes that are reported. Given this time we didn't have the financial information, there was still quite a lot of time taken on this, and I think it is something that we might look to improve, and I'd hope that the Cabinet would be supportive of establishing a different approach. Two questions, Chair, from me as it relates to the report. As I struggled into Winchester yet again today, despite it being the school holidays, the roads were still really busy. And my question, and it did come up in some form at the scrutiny meeting, relates to the movement strategy and the agreement that we have, a collaborative effort with Hampshire and ourselves, and indeed we do have some monies available in SIL to ensure that we do address in the city some of the priorities identified in the movement strategy that we haven't currently got to. I appreciate Hampshire may have had its eye on other things in the short term regarding the organisation and activities, but I think it will be a lost opportunity if we don't actually leverage a very good document to see how we can further improve movement in the city. And maybe it's something that we can take offline and have a further review of in terms of the activities. And Chair, my second point, and it was just a point of clarification. If you read on page of the regeneration report in the document, and you look at the RAG status, all fine, and you talk about the May Cabinet seeking approval for the proposed land acquisition required to support the delivery of the scheme. I'm not sure required to support the delivery of the scheme is what you said to us on Tuesday. You said this was absolutely a separate acquisition. It would be incremental, but it was not dependent on the scheme progressing. So I'm just questioning the words in here, and I'm being pedantic, but I do think it is important because it says required to support the delivery. And I'd ask maybe that you review those words and actually perhaps better reflect what was reported earlier in the week. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think you make a good point there, Chief Executive. If we could correct that, is that something we correct in the report? Because I think it would be, I think it's safe to say that the more detailed paper that we saw today is more accurate record, but it's good if we're in the same meeting to make sure that we're using the right language.
Absolutely, Leader. These reports are prepared clearly at the end of the quarter, and the reports were just on a different timescale, so we can just adjust that phrasing. Our version has been published on the website. We'll just make an adjustment. Thank you.
And of course, it'll be important that this is in the paper as an action for the next quarter. When it's reported in the next quarter, it should be reported more accurately.
Right. We have the Chair of Scrutiny.
Thank you. I'll be brief on this item. Given the breadth of the report, the focus of scrutiny's review was on areas where performance is off track, where issues are recurring, and where there are implications for future delivery. I guess the couple of the key themes were the most consistent theme was around climate delivery. Members noted that both corporate and district carbon reduction measures have been rated amber for an extended period, and asked at what point this triggers a formal recovery approach and whether we're still on track to meet longer term targets. There are also questions about the clarity and consistency of reporting, particularly around the local area energy plan, which I think have been partly addressed by Councillor Cutler's reply earlier. The second area was housing delivery with the new homes programme, retrofit and damp and mould all remaining amber. Members asked whether current actions are sufficient and whether performance is moving at the pace required. Finally, there were broader points about ensuring reports clearly distinguish between one-off issues and structural challenges, and how emerging risks, particularly local government reorganisation, will be reflected in future reporting. Overall, the report demonstrates good progress in many areas, but scrutiny would highlight the need of greater clarity on recovery actions and continued focus on areas that had been off track for a sustained period. And to Councillor Horrell's point earlier, I think many of us on scrutiny would agree that actually how we scrutinise performance monitoring is something which I think we all want to discuss and improve going forward. So we'll be having discussions with officers and others about how we can do that. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much indeed. A few questions there. I don't know. I think if cabinet members, are you happy, Councillor Cutler, if cabinet members answer their particular portfolio areas?
I think these are the questions that I couldn't answer at scrutiny, so therefore I think Councillor Learning and Councillor Porter in particular have a couple of things need responding to. Thank you.
Councillor Learning, do you want to kick off? We'll give you half an hour.
Thank you. I don't think I'll need quite that long. I'm really pleased that members are taking such an interest in our climate reporting and this part of the council's agenda. I think it's important to start by saying that we can't pretend that LGR isn't having a significant impact in a lot of the areas of work we do, particularly where they're, if you like, project led. So we know that they will take a number of years before they to implement and come to fruition. So, for example, a good example really is the large-scale solar project, where we have prepared the business case, but it is quite clear that we have neither the organisational capacity nor the time in which we'll be capable of taking the appropriate business decisions for us to do that as an administration. However, what we can do with some of these things is leave them in a really good place for whoever takes after us. So the groundwork has been done, and certainly it's something which I hope that the new authority, when it comes in, will consider. But it is proving particularly difficult. Again, when we look at the decarbonising corporate assets, while we have been looking at the Guildhall in particular, and certainly hope to do significant work as part of that project. Again, we have a limited period of time with city offices. We have no idea if those offices will be required in the future by a new local authority, and we cannot prepare sensible business cases for decarbonisation on the basis of assets which we don't know will be needed in a couple of years' time. We have been making good progress on the smaller scale PV, which I am really pleased about. The staff travel survey, this has, as I understand, been completed. Clearly, this is an important part of our carbon reporting. While we could consider adding councillors into that, I'm not sure it would be particularly productive because we work in such a different way to staff. I mean, it is very difficult for us to develop a survey which would capture the journeys that councillors make on a day-to-day basis, particularly when we're thinking about, well, what kind of distance do you travel? Clearly for members of cabinet, we're coming to the office more often, but we're still, if you like, making quite a few journeys in lots of different ways. You know, the question of how do you predominantly come into the council offices is not really relevant for councillors, given the frequency. So as I say, it is something we could look at, particularly if we think about doing it on a voluntary basis. But I think it would be a matter for interest rather than one that we could really take action on. We do need to think about what's in our carbon neutrality action plan, but certainly the staff time to the officer time needed to provide a full revision just isn't there. And once again, I think we have to think of it as a model which we would be keen to see adopted by our by the joint authority when it's created. It does need a regular adjustment, and actually the actions within it we do adjust as time goes on, but that's not the same as having a wholesale look at it. Carbon monitoring will, I'm afraid, continue to be 2 years in arrears for the district because that's when government produces it, essentially. The good thing about it is that while it is produced 2 years in arrears, we are reasonably confident that what's in there is a reasonable representation of what's happening. The only way we will fix that would be by doing considerable amounts of work ourselves, which again, we just don't have the capacity to do, and I'm not sure it would actually be that productive. I think we know where we are on the climate emergency, and as something which the leader regularly tells us around election time is there's no point counting whether you're failing, just do more about it. So I think it is one where it's important that we spend the time doing as much as we can rather than actually just collecting figures. The local authority energy plan is on track, and as has been said, we're looking forward to presenting it. Although one of the things to say about that is that I think we need to remember that this is not going to be a paper plan. It is going to be the first electronic local area energy plan. So it won't be presented in quite the same way as it will be for other authorities, but the great advantage is that that has built-in flexibility into it, which will make it relatively easy to adjust over time. We do need to look at how we will make sure it keeps updated, as this will require some staff resource. I don't know, was there any particular other questions that you think I should pick up, Leader?
I think that was a helpful discussion. I think there's an interesting process point as to how we handle this kind of deep dive. I don't think it makes sense, and I don't think there are enough hours in the scrutiny meeting to have every single cabinet member there answering every single area in detail. It's better to flag an area that people want to explore and then agree that at the following scrutiny meeting it gets explored. Now I realise I'm only about to just give you a thing to do, but given the level of interest, what we might, obviously it's entirely a matter for the scrutiny committee and the chair of the scrutiny committee, but it's probably more productive rather than trying to do it via a bit of a conversation at scrutiny and a bit of a conversation here, to say that at the next meeting there will be a deeper dive on where we are on the carbon portfolio. Obviously that's a matter for discussion with the chair of scrutiny, who's giving a thumbs up sign, but that feels like a more productive way of doing it, so that we're all prepared to know that this is an area we're going deep in. There's even a potential for scheduling how we talk about each area of the council plan, other than things that are clearly exceptions, during the course of the year, so that cabinet members know when it's coming, officers know when it's coming, and we can have really good detailed discussions on particular portfolio areas. Realising I've just thrown you under a bus there, Councillor Lerney, and it's not entirely in our hands, but I'm seeing positive noises from the chair of scrutiny. Is that something you'd be up for? It feels better than lots of little conversations.
Definitely, but we do need to remember that this will require extra officer time as well. Otherwise, there is a danger that you sit there going, I'll have to get back to you on that one.
And I think that ties into the point of, actually, if it's a properly scheduled programme across the year, then it's easier for officers to manage. They know what they're aiming at as well. Good.
May I assist, Leader?
Yeah, obviously, Chief Executive, it's a matter for you to discuss with the chair of scrutiny. We have no role in it, but
Well, the chair of scrutiny may invite who he wishes to attend the meeting. I think we would be able to support that from an officer perspective. I mean, if there was if there is a requirement for a cabinet member to attend, I would anticipate that we could deploy 2 members of staff, the lead director and the relevant corporate head to attend. I wouldn't anticipate doing any pre-work. I mean, it's, we're not presenting a paper. I mean, it is the question and answer based on the report. That's the piece we wouldn't be able to resource easily. But I just wanted to say, I mean, members, thank you for your comments about the positive work that the council delivers. And it's just important to remember that this quarterly report is a snapshot, is the most important things that this administration believes demonstrates its commitment to the council plan. And there's been just a couple of comments at scrutiny, which I just want to draw members' attention to, around like things being off track for some time. Those are matters that are marked amber. And if we look at the coding, it says it's a minor concern. There are some issues, it's being managed, needs to be closely monitored. And that's what you do as cabinet members in the board meetings that you hold. If there was a significant concern, the matter would be read. And at that point, there is a recovery plan to be put in place. And we know from other conversations in other places, for instance, around work at Cabcom Housing, that Councillor Reach would manage those areas clearly, as his responsible role as cabinet member, that linked to some red marks in here. I would also say, just while I have the floor, this council is hugely ambitious and delivers far beyond other councils of its size and scope. We regularly receive national awards, local plan, carbon, housing, homelessness. This is not a council that is shying from its responsibility to deliver, but just at the moment and throughout the time that we've worked together in the life of these plans, other things get in the way. COVID, you know, cost of living crisis. There are numerous issues that the complexity of retaining qualified staff who are absolutely free agents to work in many other places, and now LGR, because the focus has to be on maintaining this excellent level of service over the next 2 years for Winchester City Council and creating a whole new council called Mid Hampshire Council. So we need to be, and there you as an administration have determined that these are the items you will use to track for that. And if I have the floor just for one more second, to say it's a pretty good report. And there are some areas that we're focused on, and the director team are absolutely across that. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much indeed, Chief Executive, and please do pass on my thanks to all your colleagues, because you're right. Obviously, it is the job of scrutiny to scrutinise and to find areas where we can do better, and all strength to them in doing that, because we are a council that wants to do better. But we should not lose sight of the fact that the fundamental level of performance outlined in this report is impressive and something that you and your colleagues should be proud of. That doesn't mean we won't keep asking for more. Well, thank you very much. That doesn't mean we won't keep on asking for more, and that scrutiny won't ask us for even more than that. But Councillor Porter, you also had some questions.
I did, but actually, I was going to say one of the things about planning is that, and particularly the local plan, which is where it comes up on the report, is that the actions for next quarter are where I rely on the professionalism of our own staff to know what needs to be done. They know what their timetable is, and so you're asking about the issue of holding feet to the fire and making sure that it does get done in the 30 months, and it's very clear what those actions are for the next quarter. But as well as doing that, our team also regularly are in contact with the Planning Advisory Service and the MHCLG, so that they know every single nuance of what is changing as the potential legislation is changing. They also sought a grant for £23,000 from the MHCLG, and we're one of the councils that got it. We have gone digital first as a process, and that is a very important part of the work, and it ties up with the improved customer service as well, so that we're conscious that it's not just one department that's looking at this. IDOCS is being covered in many areas, and also the customer service for the planning process. I was going to also mention that actually there's one I really like the layout of this report. I mean, having sat with the other one for years, this one is really good for me as a guideline as well, to make sure that I know what the actions are and I can discuss those with the team, but also seeing other people's requirements as well. And so only 62.2% of our community is connected to gigabit connectivity. I'm very conscious of that at home. I have to move from room to room sometimes when it gets bad, as I'm sure many of you do in our working processes, and so I'm conscious that that's a need for the whole of our community, and it's something that we perhaps need to address more in the local plan. There's a project inception document. I'm actually meeting next Tuesday to go through the start of that work, and we know that there's a consultation coming up in June. So it's very clear that our staff know professionally what needs to be done. It's my job to make sure that I give them the support, but also the challenge to make sure that that work is done on a strategic side. They know what they've got to do day to day. And I'm really proud of the fact we've got to this point and are somewhat unique in pressing all of our other local district councils to have statements of common ground at the moment, so that we're all ready to move. And I know many of them are already created, so that we're all ready to move on to the next stage with LGR as well.
Thank you, Councillor Porter.
Sorry.
Are there any other points that need to be addressed that are highlighted in this report? Are there any questions that colleagues have? Otherwise, is there any debate that people want to make? Any concluding thoughts?
Well, thank you, Leader. I think it's clear that the report is effective in providing the snapshot that gives both scrutiny and all members actually the opportunity to see the work across the council as the Chief Executive pointed out. So I'm pleased with the level of the report. I'm pleased with the level of scrutiny we've had, and I hope we've succeeded in answering most of the questions that were asked.
Thank you very much indeed. I think I've already made my positive comments about the work that's in here. Suffice it to say that I'm very appreciative for all the work, the huge amount of work that goes on for colleagues across the council. Thank you also to Cabinet colleagues who've answered questions. I realise we may have done it slightly informally and oddly, but I think the potential way forward for how we can have really good discussions at scrutiny to help us further improve was a worthwhile one to have in passing. There is an amendment to the particular clause that was highlighted by Councillor Horrell, which we will make but the recommendation in front of us is that we note the progress achieved during Q4 25-26, endorse the contents of the report subject to the change, and I'll add the word subject to the drafting amendment suggested. But Cabinet, is that agreed?
Great.
Thank you all very much indeed. We now move on to appointment to Cabinet committees. We have separate bits of paper here in front of us. The first thing we're being asked to look at is Appendix A, which is the appointment to bodies listed in Appendix A, and I'll rattle through these fairly quickly. I think. Do we have councillors wanting to speak? So we have Councillor Lee and Councillor Horrell. Just checking which bit of paper it's this one, isn't it? It's the first. Yeah, so Cabinet committees first. Yeah, okay, it's this bit of paper. Councillor Lee, Councillor Horrell, do you want to come forward? Maybe if you both come forward for this. Do you have a particular deputation that you wish to make?
Thank you, Leader. I don't think I've got any particular deputations. Councillor Horrell and I have talked through some of these suggested nominations. Picking up on TAC board, for example, it would seem pragmatic for Councillor Horrell, who's done sterling work, particularly with that board, to continue, and that's supported by my group. And I think we've agreed that, Councillor Horrell, haven't we? And the only other one which is a change in terms of the group dynamics would be the Winchester Sport Leisure Park Advisory Board meeting, where we would be proposing Councillor Cook, who has some experience and has voiced some interest for that. The rest, I think, are as written, basically.
Okay, so that's good. And what we may be able to do in some cases where we have more nominations than places is to adjust we're allowed to have on the committee. We'll briefly touch on that. So we have the Cabinet Committee Housing, clear nominations, Local Plan, clear nominations, Regeneration, clear nominations, Do I need to read them out? Probably do, don't I? Okay, so can we just,
The emotion so slow.
yeah, okay. So can we just agree that page? Yep. Okay, the next page, TAC board, we have a joint nomination. The climate and nature open forum, I think there's a misunderstanding here. I'm not entirely sure why we're even nominating this position, because it is the cabinet member for responsibility with climate change, and anyone else can turn up. So that is Councillor Learning. That's not to disrespect any other name there. That's just the way it's constituted. The EDI forum, there's no discussion. The Sport and Leisure Park Advisory Board meeting. Councillor Cook. So you're happy to go a joint view of Councillor Cook for that? Is that? Or
That's my proposal, yeah.
that's your proposal,
Yeah.
and your proposal is Councillor Horrell.
Absolutely,
Personally, I'm quite relaxed. Are we able to just add a place and have both groups represented? No. Oh, right, we can't.
What's the MO?
MO, can we add a place and have both groups represented? So it is defined somewhere, is it? Okay.
I've sought some advice, and I think the answer is that we could potentially put both names forward today, but it would need to be checked with the board, because there was just need to make sure that it doesn't it's the impact on the balance of the makeup of the board.
Right, okay, that sounds like we can't. And I think we will go with, in this case, we will go with the principal opposition. I mean, there may be a discussion about wider involvement later on, but it sounds like it's a more complicated question than we can answer at this meeting. So I suggest that we go for councillors Becca, Aaron Murphy, 2 local ward members and the cabinet member, and the principal opposition group member for sport, who the principal opposition in this case is the Independent Green Group, so that would be Councillor Cook. CWR project board is fine, so that page then is agreed. Strategic SAPS board, there's no. Treasury Investment Group, one of these great committees that I don't remember ever meeting, but again, what options do we have here? Are we okay to have an extra member for the World End? That we can't. Okay, so then the principal opposition group member for finance is Councillor Wallace. So as defined by the list, again, there's a question for whether we go back and re-look at what the definition is, but we need to do that coherently. LGR board, fine. Kings Barton Forum, fine. Western Waterlooville Forum. So we make the decision on that basis.
Just suggest that.
Oh.
West Waterlooville Forum, Councillor Clear will be the Hampshire County Council representative on the West Waterlooville Forum. Sorry, Councillor Clear will be the Hampshire County Council, one of the Hampshire County Council representatives on the forum, so it's probably not there to have her as a deputy. So there are 4 members. I would say the deputies of the 5th. The one other member of that Denmead Southwark and Wickham, so put Councillor Clay as a deputy on there rather than Claire.
Yeah, we don't know what the county is going to decide in terms of their nominations to committees. That's something we all have to look forward to.
I'm just going to say from experience, they'd like you to be the deputy on one and the place on the other. So we will have to sort that out with the county council.
Yeah, I mean, we will.
Kings Barton and West
We will have to work out what happens on Kings Barton because there are 2 places there.
You can't be the deputy as well as the city the county as well as the city council.
Okay. Well, what I suggest we do is we make a mental note that we'll
We need to confirm
revisit
those.
that based on what comes out of the county decision making.
Yes, sorry, it was hard to hear what you were saying about Kings Barton. Could you
So the
just
King
repeat
Barton
that?
issue is that we don't know who the county nominations are, and there are 2 county councillors listed there. I'm already on it as a county representative, but we need to find out.
So
There's 2 county
from
representatives.
from my experience, I was the councillor for the city and a deputy at the county, and I was told that couldn't be possible. So therefore you had to completely separate them. So, and as everybody's now county councillors, it's difficult to.
So we will sort that out. So I think what we're saying is we'll agree what's in front of us now, but this may come back and will need to be sorted out at a later date for the next meeting. And then we have member champion roles. The only one that's contested here is Councillor Laming and Councillor Godfrey for the Armed Forces champion. I think it's a reopening of the decision that we made last year. So
Councillor Godfrey will be in a unique position as deputy mayor and then mayor. So
Councillor Godfrey will be doing a lot with the armed forces anyway, I think, particularly as he moves towards the mayoral team. So I suggest we leave that unchanged. Otherwise, that's all agreed. So colleagues, yeah, so let's just take that. We consider the appointments. So we have 4 recommendations. We've talked through all of them. Are those recommendations agreed? Thank you very much indeed. The next one is outside bodies. Table 1 is no appointments, so we can obviously agree that. Table 2 is automatic appointments for cabinet members. So we definitely agree that as well. Table 3 is nominations from political groups.
There's no contest.
And there are no contests on those. Sorry, table 2, I'm losing track of the table. So table 1 is no appointments. Table 2 is automatic for relevant cabinet members. Table 3 is no contest appointments. So they're agreed. More nominations than vacancies. So Hampshire Cultural Trust, we have a trustee who's Councillor Thompson, ex officio, and then an observer. We have interest from Councillor Rutter and Councillor White. I think we'll go with Councillor Rutter. The Police and Crime Panel. We have interest from, so Councillor Murphy as our one representative, Councillor Laming as the deputy, Councillor Cook and Councillor Warwick as proposed for the representative. I propose that we go with Councillor Murphy. The River Hamble Management Board. We have Councillor Power as the voting member, and then Councillor Wallace either proposed as the voting member or as the deputy, depending on who's put the name forward. I suggest we go with Councillor Power as the voting member and Councillor Wallace as the deputy. Let's keep going. We have, so the Southampton International Airport Consultative Committee, Councillor Lerney is there ex officio. We then have one representative and 2 deputies. So we have Councillor Bennett, Councillor Cook and Councillor Warwick proposed as representative, and then Councillors Aaron and Cook proposed as deputies. I suggest we go with Councillor Lerney and Councillor Bennett as the representatives and Councillors Aaron and Cook as the deputies. St John's, Winchester, we have 2 nominations, Councillor Thompson and Councillor Horrell. I think Councillor Thompson is a former housing portfolio holder. Well, both are actually.
Yes, of course, Councillor Thompson not only previously held the housing portfolio, but currently holds the business portfolio, both of which have relevance to that appointment.
Right, I think we'll go with Councillor Thompson. Wellbourne Community Forum, we have Councillor Chamberlain and Councillor White. Councillor Chamberlain is ward member next to it, in essence, doesn't he? So I think we go with Councillor Chamberlain. The Sports Stadium Management Committee, Councillor Becker is the cabinet member, and then Councillor Aaron is the ward member, and Councillor Warwick is interested as well. I suggest we go with Councillors Becker and Aaron. And finally, the Winchester Welfare Charities. Councillor Ashwell is not up for re-selection. Oh, no, sorry, Councillor Gordon Smith is not up for re-selection. He's in place till 2028. But Councillor Ashwell is and wishes to continue, and Councillor Cook wishes to be on there as well. I think we'll go with Councillor Ashwell. Well, I think there is a point here which we do need to talk about in terms of reporting back and serving on those committees. So I think we've been through the recommendations to make the appointments detailed in Appendix A. As it says here, I think it is useful to reshare the guidance on serving on outside bodies.
Of course, Leader.
We have also talked about people reporting back, and I think we may need a method that is short of the full council report that we've talked about in the past. I think it remains important that major roles like, South Downs National Park do a proper do proper full reports, but I think there are other roles. Councillor Horrell, you wish to make a point?
Chair, yes, thank you. I did just put my name down to speak here. You've addressed one of the issues that I wanted to raise, which is the Constitution does allow for outside body reporting. We have that done very well with South Downs National Park. You've done it for Push. I think if these appointments are going to be meaningful, it would be helpful to use that opportunity in the Constitution for reports to come forward through the year, and that we should agree a schedule so that that can be done. We have the mechanic, we're simply not implementing it in full. So I would very much endorse your support for that. The other question I have, Chair, really is that certainly Conservative members would have liked to have been considered for representation on many of the bodies that you've addressed today, the outside bodies in particular. But the way that we do this, putting names forward, and then obviously you're very keen that you exercise your position as the administration, I think it would be kinder to have had an offline discussion, which didn't really take place, about your desired political outcome and also the nominations put forward, because it is quite a difficult situation to be sat here and said thank you, but no on so many. And if we can do that, I think it would be a better outcome for everyone, and sort of not really a false effort at showing democracy, because you clearly have a view on who you'd like to be on those committees, and that's entirely your privilege. But I think it would be kinder if we'd have those conversations beforehand, and then we don't put ourselves through, will we, won't we, which we've just done on a number of these. But appreciate your support on outside bodies reporting to the council in due course. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Yes, I agree. And having been at the receiving end of the similar process at another place, I can tell you that it's not a particularly pleasant experience, particularly where we saw the Conservative and Reform councillors vote unanimously in favour of George Madrick rather than me as chair of the Principal Scrutiny Committee at Hampshire. It is not a particularly pleasant experience, but I recognise that we need to find a way of doing it better. I think your point about reporting back is it's a common agenda that all of us hold. We've improved. We still have further to go, but the days when people would disappear off to Midhurst, to the South Downs National Park, and we'd sort of see them again about 4 years later, I think those days have got to come to an end, have come to an end, fortunately. I think the idea of a forward plan across the year I'm very happy to talk to the chief executive about that in terms of the full council agenda to see if we can get a schedule round the year. I don't know if colleagues have views on that.
I think the problem there might be that at the midway through the year, a lot of these organisations members will have essentially nothing to report. I think it might be easier to wrap up in a kind of end of year short reporting form rather than a full report from each member, depending on the significance of the body.
I think there is a difference between, yeah, I think we need to think about the balance between the full report and questions at full council, which is absolutely appropriate for something like the South Downs National Park. But it feels like there should be something from people, whether it's a short written report that sort of covers everything in towards the end of the year, or a member briefing where people have a chance to come along and answer questions. There needs to be something better than we have. Councillor Porter.
I have to say, I completely agree. And it would be perhaps useful even just to prepare a paper and then ask for questions on it to the council, to full council. But I also quite like the idea of the briefing that we can be giving. We can even organise in somewhere like this for ourselves. But I think that it would be really, really useful to be able to offer that knowledge that you've gained from those committees actually to the rest of the council.
And actually, I think if people knew they were going to have to report back to council, then it would probably change how they did the role. I think
it would be welcomed, I think, for most people who spend time there and want to share what they've learned.
Okay, that's very helpful.
Absolutely, Leader. Very happy to assist. I'm trying to look up the constitution on my phone, which is I can't decide if I need my glasses on or glasses off at this point. But Councillor Lerney has captured it. This was a matter that was significantly discussed at the Constitution Working Party. Councillor Becker, do feel free, of course, to set the context there. But it was around that council would receive some principal responses from Push and from South Downs, and I just can't see the 0.5 font there. But I think the idea, just as we have an annual audit report and an annual scrutiny report, there is absolutely something around a wrap-up report from outside bodies as appropriate, Leader. But I'm sure Councillor Becker could take that forward.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, I don't recall that we did list some specifically, and then which I agree, I think was Push and South Downs National Park. But the expectation during that working group certainly was that if you are appointed to one of these roles, then you should be expected to report back on it to full council in some form. So I would also be supportive of that. I should say that was something that was agreed across the groups. I think we were unanimous in agreeing that that ought to take place.
So I have the specific clause on my laptop, which is helpful, which is receiving reports at least annually by way of update on the work of representatives to outside bodies where powers are conferred to them by the council to include, but not exhaustive, Partnership for South Hampshire and South Downs National Park Authority. And I think what we need to do is maybe a quick audit to say, are there other bodies where people are acting with powers on behalf of a council? A good example would be joint advisory committees and things like that for local government reorganisation.
The Cultural Trust, for example.
That is interestingly more difficult because when somebody is a trustee, they are not acting on behalf of the council. They are acting as a trustee that happens to come from the council, but their interest is to that organisation. But I agree there needs to be a method of reporting back. It's not quite the same though.
And that organisation are required to attend scrutiny annually to present work.
Also sounds like let's have a look at how that all works then. So let's put that in scope. I mean, just as informal piece of work that maybe we just use to inform the agenda. I don't know if we need to take that as a formal recommendation, but I think yeah, I'm going to add a recommendation. Who am I asking to do this?
Perhaps it is, Leader, that, well, you're not, you're just asking that the committee, the cabinet determined to ask, it's actually the monitoring officer, to review the reporting arrangements for those members that attended outside bodies. But I think we've all noted it and we've all heard it.
So we'll just add that as a recommendation that that cabinet request the monitoring officer to review reporting requirements for outside bodies, and because we touched on bodies that report back to us and bodies that report back to us, reporting back either by bodies where, you know, or either from our representatives or from the bodies directly where we have representation. If we could just have a look at that, because we were talking about the fact that the Cultural Trust report, well, you understand the point. Okay, turn that into something good as a minute, and that would be good. Thank you. That's the second request. Okay, we have four recommendations. Making appointments to the vacancies detailed in Appendix A, reminding people of the responsibilities while representing the council on external organisation, delegated to the Chief Executive in consultation with the Leader and Director of Legal to agree terms of reference and the associated provisions of the two voluntary or joint committees set out in paragraphs 2.5 and 2.6, which are the two formal joint committees. So the Mid Hampshire and the South East Hampshire Voluntary Joint Committee arrangements. There's also an important new Hampshire and Salem Combined County Authority Planning Advisory Board. So devolution and local government reorganisation coming our way, making appointments for those. And then a fourth recommendation to say to review arrangements for reporting back by outside representatives to full council or via all the organisations, sorry, by outside representatives, all the organisations they sit on, to full council or via other routes. Yeah, something like that. Are those recommendations agreed?
Agreed.
Good, thank you very much indeed. Future items for consideration by Cabinet under the forward plan. You happy to note those? Is the next item. Are you happy to note it? Oh, good, thank you. And then I think, is that it? No, we then have the exempt papers, but we agreed that we weren't going to discuss those. So I think we have covered the entire agenda. Thank you to visiting councillors. Thank you to the Chair of Scrutiny. Thank you to officers for all the work that's gone into the papers that we have in front of us today. Thank you for the Cabinet colleagues for reading them and considering them and for the discussion that we've had. I declare the meeting closed.